The janitor saw what the billionaires missed, and it cost him everything to speak up. In a glass tower where genius wore $1,000 suits, a man pushing a mop bucket held the answer to a $100 million disaster. But when Adrian Cole dared to interrupt the experts, their laughter cut deeper than any insult. They didn't know he'd been one of them once. They didn't know the system that was bleeding their company dry was the same one that had destroyed his life years ago. And they definitely didn't know that the woman running it all was about to realize her biggest mistake wasn't in the code. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in the Nextcore Technologies headquarters buzzed with the kind of persistent hum that most people stopped hearing after the first week. Adrian Cole heard everything. 6 months into this job, and he still noticed the electrical whine, the shuffle of expensive shoes on polished marble, the particular pitch of voices that came with corner offices and stock options. He'd trained himself to hear things others missed. It was a survival skill now, though it used to be something else entirely. His mop made wet circles across the floor of the executive wing, the same pattern he'd traced every weeknight for half a year. Left, right, forward, back. The rhythm was meditative if you let it be. Adrian didn't let it be. His mind was always working, always processing, always 3 steps ahead of wherever his hands happened to be. That's what got him into trouble before. That's what kept him alive now. Did you get the corner by the elevator? Marcus, the night shift supervisor, poked his head around the hallway corner. He was a decent guy, mid-50s, wore his wedding ring with pride, and talked about his grandkids like they'd invented breathing. Somebody spilled coffee earlier. Didn't get cleaned up. On it, Adrian said. His voice came out neutral, agreeable. He'd perfected that tone. Not too friendly, not too distant. Just enough humanity to be polite, not enough personality to be memorable. Marcus nodded and disappeared. Adrian pushed his cart toward the elevator bank, but his attention was already drifting to the conference room on the left. The big one. The glass walls were frosted for privacy, but he could see shapes moving inside. Shadows of people who ran the world from ergonomic chairs. They'd been in there for hours. 4, maybe 5. Adrian had watched them arrive in waves, first the senior engineers, then the financial team, then the executive leadership. Vivian Hart had been the last one in, moving through the hallway like she owned the oxygen itself. Which, technically, she kind of did. 30 years old and already the CEO of a company worth more than some country's GDP. Adrian had read about her in Forbes while waiting at the free clinic with his daughter last month. The magazine was 8 months old and missing pages, but Vivian's profile was intact. Cold, brilliant, ruthless. The kind of woman who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. He didn't think about her much beyond that. She existed in a different atmosphere. The coffee stain was exactly where Marcus said it'd be. A brown splatter that someone had half-heartedly tried to wipe up with what looked like a business card. Adrian knelt down, pulled out the cleaning spray, and got to work. The card was still there, wedged against the baseboard. He picked it up. David Thornton, Chief Technology Officer, Nextcore Technologies. The gold lettering caught the light. Adrian flicked it into his trash bag and kept scrubbing. Through the frosted glass, he could hear raised voices. Not quite yelling, but close. The kind of controlled tension that came right before someone's career imploded. Adrian had heard it before. Different building, different company, different life. He stood up, checked his work, and started pushing the cart back toward the supply closet. He'd learned not to linger. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant nobody asked questions about why a guy with his resume was pushing a mop at 32. But then he heard something that made him stop. The feedback loop is clean. I've run it 17 times. Adrian's hand froze on the cart handle. He knew that voice. David Thornton, the CTO whose business card was currently sitting in a bag of used paper towels and gum wrappers. Then why are we hemorrhaging accuracy every 6 hours? That was Vivian. Her voice was colder than the magazine profile suggested. Our AI platform is supposed to be learning. Instead, it's getting dumber. Explain that. Ma'am, with all due respect, the diagnostics show. I don't care what the diagnostics show. I care what the clients see. And what they see is a system that's destroying its own credibility. We've got 3 major contracts threatening to walk. That's $100 million, David, so either the diagnostics are lying or you're reading them wrong. Silence. Adrian could picture the CTO's face, that particular shade of red that came right before someone started making excuses. He should keep walking. He should get his cart back to the closet, clock out, pick up Emma from his neighbor's place, and go home to their one-bedroom apartment where the radiator clanked and the upstairs neighbors fought about money every Thursday. He should stay invisible, but his feet wouldn't move. Because in that silence, in the space between Vivian's accusation and whatever defensive bullshit Thornton was about to throw back, Adrian heard the shape of the problem. Not the details, not yet, but the outline, feedback loop, decreasing accuracy, self-learning system eating itself. He'd seen it before. "Mr. Cole?" Adrian jerked back to reality. Marcus was standing 3 feet away, looking concerned. "You okay? You've been standing there for like 2 minutes." "Yeah." Adrian blinked, forced his hands to move. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." "Tell me about it." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Get that cart put away and head out. Your little girl's probably wondering where you are." "Emma." "Right." Adrian nodded, managed something like a smile, and pushed the cart down the hallway. But his mind was still in that conference room, still tracing the edges of a problem that shouldn't have been his to solve. The apartment was dark when Adrian got home at midnight 30. He locked the door behind him, 2 deadbolts and a chain, habits from cheaper neighborhoods, and moved through the living room without turning on lights. Emma's bedroom door was cracked open. He pushed it wider, letting the hallway light spill across her bed. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark hair and his stubborn chin. Currently, she was sprawled across the mattress like she'd been wrestling invisible opponents, one arm hanging off the edge, her favorite stuffed rabbit wedged under her shoulder. Adrian adjusted the blanket, tucked her arm back in, and stood there for a moment just watching her breathe. This was why he stayed invisible. This was why he mopped floors and kept his mouth shut, and pretended the world he used to belong to didn't exist anymore. Because Emma needed stability, needed food, and a roof, and a dad who showed up every single day. She didn't need a father chasing redemption. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen next door. She ate all her dinner. Math homework done. Asleep by 9:30. "You're a good dad, Adrian." He texted back a thank you, set his phone on the counter, and opened the fridge. Leftover pasta from 3 days ago, half a jar of sauce, some wilted lettuce he should probably throw out. He grabbed the pasta, ate it cold standing at the counter, and tried not to think about the conference room. Didn't work. Feedback loop. Self-reinforcing error. The AI wasn't learning from new data. It was learning from its own outputs, creating a closed system that amplified whatever bias was already there, like screaming into a microphone pointed at its own speaker. The noise just got louder and more distorted until nothing made sense anymore. He'd warned them about this exact scenario 4 years ago. Different company, same problem. Neurosphere Technologies had been building a predictive algorithm for financial markets, and Adrian had been their lead systems architect. 28 years old and brilliant enough that people actually listened when he talked. He'd spotted the recursive bias in the training model, wrote a 16-page analysis, presented it to the board. They thanked him, told him they'd look into it. Then they'd buried his report, tweaked the system just enough to pass the next round of investor demos, and pushed the product to market 6 months ahead of schedule. 3 months after that, the algorithm crashed spectacularly, costing the company $40 million and triggering a federal investigation. Neurosphere needed a scapegoat. Adrian's warnings were nowhere in the official record. Someone had scrubbed them, but his name was on the original architecture documents. The narrative became simple. Young hotshot architect builds flawed system. Company suffers. Architect gets fired. He tried to fight it, showed them his emails, his meeting notes, his original analysis. But Neurosphere had lawyers who cost more per hour than Adrian made in a month. And they had a very clear story about an arrogant employee who couldn't handle criticism. The tech community was small and gossip traveled fast. Within 6 months, Adrian couldn't get an interview anywhere that mattered. Then Sarah got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 3 weeks after Emma's 4th birthday. The medical bills swallowed their savings, then their credit, then any chance Adrian had of clawing his way back into the industry. He spent Sarah's last year taking care of her and their daughter, working whatever jobs would give him flexible hours. After she died, he kept working those jobs because the tech world had moved on and his name was still mud. Now, he cleaned floors in buildings where people like him used to work. Adrian threw the empty pasta container in the trash and stared at his reflection in the dark window above the sink. 32 years old, going gray at the temples. Hands that used to write code now smelled like industrial cleaner. He should let it go. NextCore's problem wasn't his problem. Vivian Hart and her billionaire empire could crash and burn for all he cared. Except he did care. That was the thing that made him dangerous to himself. He still cared about elegant systems and clean code and problems that had real solutions if people would just listen. That instinct hadn't died with his career. It was still there, humming under his skin like those fluorescent lights. Adrian turned away from the window and went to check on Emma one more time before bed. She'd rolled over, was hugging the rabbit with both arms now. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Love you, baby girl." She didn't wake up. She never did. Adrian was good at being quiet. The next night, the conference room was still occupied. Same frosted glass, same expensive shadows moving inside, same tension bleeding through the walls. Adrian mopped his way down the executive hallway, keeping his head down, his movements mechanical. Just another invisible cog in the machine. But he was listening. But tried recalibrating the training parameters 3 different ways. That was someone Adrian didn't recognize. Young voice, nervous, probably one of the junior engineers. Nothing's working. If anything, it's getting worse. Define word. Vivian Hart's voice cut through the room like a scalpel through tissue. The system is now showing a 38% accuracy rate on standard queries. That's down from 92% 2 weeks ago. Someone swore Adrian thought it might have been Thornton, but he couldn't be sure. How is that possible? Vivian again. She didn't sound angry anymore. She sounded dangerous, which was worse. We have 12 PhDs on this team. Our AI division has a budget that could fund a small country. And you're telling me our flagship product is now worse than flipping a coin? Ma'am, the issue is complex. Don't. The single word carried enough weight to stop whoever was speaking mid-sentence. Don't tell me it's complex. I know it's complex. That's why I pay you. What I need is a solution. Adrian's mop had somehow migrated closer to the conference room door. He wasn't sure when that happened. His body was on autopilot, muscle memory handling the cleaning while his brain worked on a completely different problem. 38% accuracy. From 92. That wasn't a gradual decline. That was a system in free fall. He thought about Emma, about the rent due in 2 weeks, about the careful invisibility he'd built over the last 3 years. Then he thought about the whiteboard he could see through the frosted glass, covered in equations and diagrams that probably cost a combined $500,000 in Ivy League educations to produce. They were looking in the wrong place. He could tell from the shape of the diagrams alone. They were treating it like a training data problem, trying to fix the inputs. But if Adrian was right, and he was pretty sure he was right, the issue wasn't the inputs. It was the loop. The AI was feeding on its own outputs, using yesterday's flawed conclusions to inform today's analysis, creating a recursive spiral of increasing error. Every cycle made it worse, and the more they tried to fix it by adjusting the training data, the faster it would degrade. He'd written a paper about this once, back when people read his papers. Recursive bias amplification in self-modifying neural networks. Published in the Journal of Machine Learning Research, cited 47 times before Neurosphere collapsed, and Adrian's name became toxic. The journal probably still had it archived somewhere. Not that anyone in that conference room would think to look. Adrian's mop hit the wall. He'd reached the end of the hallway without realizing it. He stood there, water dripping from the mop head, staring at the frosted glass that separated him from the people trying to solve a problem he understood better than they did. Walk away, the smart part of his brain said. Not your circus. Not your monkeys. But the other part, the part that used to stay up until 3 a.m. debugging code because elegant solutions were worth losing sleep over. That part was already calculating, already seeing the fix. It would take maybe 10 minutes to explain. 5 if they were actually listening. He'd need access to their system architecture, but just to confirm what he already suspected. The solution itself was almost embarrassingly simple. Reduce the self-reinforcement coefficient, add an external validation gate, force the AI to check its conclusions against truly independent data before incorporating them into the next cycle. Simple. elegant, and completely outside the scope of what a janitor was supposed to know. Adrian squeezed the mop out in the bucket and pushed his cart back toward the supply closet. He could feel the problem pulling at him like gravity, but he kept walking. He had a daughter sleeping in Mrs. Chen's apartment. He had bills that needed paying. He had a life built on keeping his head down and his mouth shut. The conference room door opened behind him. Adrian didn't turn around, just kept pushing his cart, but he heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Tired voices in the hallway. Reconvene tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp. Vivian Hart. She sounded exhausted in a way that money couldn't fix. I want fresh eyes on this. Bring in the team from Boston if you have to. Ma'am, the Boston team is already working on the Singapore launch. I don't care. Pull them. This is priority one. If we can't stabilize the platform in the next 48 hours, we're going to lose clients we'll never get back. Adrian reached the supply closet, started loading his cart. The voices faded as the executives headed toward the elevator. He was safe. Crisis averted. He could go home, pick up Emma, and forget this ever happened. The problem was, Adrian had never been good at forgetting. What? He dreamed about whiteboards that night, equations that didn't balance, code that spiraled into infinite loops while people in suits stood around arguing about syntax when the real issue was architecture. In the dream, Sarah was there, sitting in one of the conference room chairs, watching him with that expression she used to get when he was being stubborn. You're going to do it anyway, Dream Sarah said. So why are you pretending you have a choice? Because I do have a choice, Dream Adrian shot back. I can choose to keep our daughter fed and housed. That's a choice. Is it? Sarah tilted her head. She'd lost her hair by this point in real life, but in the dream it was still long and dark, falling over her shoulders like it did before the cancer. Or are you just choosing which part of yourself to kill? Adrian woke up at 4 a.m., heart pounding. Emma's rabbit somehow wedged under his back. He must have fallen asleep in her bed again. It happened sometimes, usually after bad shifts or worse dreams. Emma was curled up next to him, one small hand resting on his arm. He carefully extracted himself without waking her, padded to the bathroom, splashed water on his face. The man in the mirror looked older than 32. Looked like he'd been living someone else's life for too long. You're not doing this, he told his reflection. You're going to work. You're going to mop floors. You're going to keep being invisible. His reflection didn't argue, didn't agree either, just stared back with tired eyes that had seen too much and said nothing at all. By the time Adrian clocked in that evening, he'd convinced himself he was fine. The next core problem was interesting but irrelevant. He had his own life to worry about, simple as that. Then he rounded the corner to the executive wing and saw the conference room. They'd left the whiteboard uncovered. Some genius had forgotten to wipe it clean before the end of the session, and now the entire architecture of their failing AI system was visible through the frosted glass for anyone with eyes and basic comprehension to see. Adrian stopped walking. His mop hung forgotten in his hands. It was worse than he thought. Way worse. They weren't just dealing with recursive bias. Someone had implemented a feedback mechanism that actively weighted the AI's own historical outputs higher than new external data, which meant the system wasn't just accidentally learning from itself. It was programmed to trust itself more than reality. Every cycle, it got more confident in its own increasingly wrong conclusions. This wasn't a bug. This was a design feature that had turned poisonous. Adrian's breath came short. He knew this architecture. He'd seen it before, not at Neurosphere, but earlier in academic papers from about 5 years ago. Cutting-edge stuff at the time, all about creating AI systems with high-confidence resilience. The idea was to make algorithms that didn't get easily swayed by noisy data. The problem was, if you tuned the confidence too high, the AI became intellectually arrogant. It stopped learning from the world and started worshiping its own reflection. Someone's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Adrian jerked back to awareness, realized he'd been standing in the middle of the corridor staring at the whiteboard like it had personally insulted him. He forced himself to move, to start mopping, to become invisible again. But his mind was racing. He could fix this. Not probably. Not maybe. He could absolutely fix this. 20 minutes to explain the problem, 10 to implement the solution. Half an hour to save NextCore $100 million. And all it would cost him was his invisibility. his safety, his carefully maintained distance from the world that had already chewed him up once. The footsteps got closer. Adrian kept his head down, focused on his mopping pattern. Left, right, forward, back. Just a janitor. Nobody important. Nothing to see here. Excuse me. The voice was female, sharp, exhausted. Adrian looked up. Vivian Hart stood 5 feet away, still wearing what was probably yesterday's clothes. A black suit jacket over a white shirt that had lost its crispness somewhere around hour 12. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had started elegant and ended functional. Without the Forbes polish and the CEO armor, she looked young, looked human, looked like someone who hadn't slept in 36 hours. She also looked directly at Adrian like he was actually there. "Is there a coffee machine on this floor?" she asked. "The executive lounge is locked and I can't find my access card." Adrian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Yeah. Down the hall, left at the corner, next to the printer room." "Thanks." She started to walk away, then paused, turned back. "You're here late." It wasn't really a question, but Adrian answered anyway. "Night shift." "Night." Vivian nodded slowly, like she was trying to remember what night shifts were. Then her gaze drifted past Adrian to the conference room, to the whiteboard visible through the glass. Her expression hardened. "That board should have been wiped," she said, more to herself than to him. She walked past Adrian, pulled open the conference room door. This was Adrian's chance to leave, to push his cart down the hallway and pretend this conversation never happened, to stay invisible. Instead, he heard himself say, "Your self-reinforcement coefficient is too high." Vivian froze in the doorway, turned around very slowly. "What did you just say?" "Too late now." Adrian swallowed hard, set his mop against the wall. "The whiteboard. Your AI architecture. The feedback loop isn't the problem. It's the weighting mechanism. You've got the system trusting its own outputs at 0.97 confidence. Anything over 0.6 in a learning system is dangerous. Over 0.8 is suicidal." For a long moment, Vivian just stared at him. Adrian could see her brain working, could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out if he was insane, dangerous, or something else entirely. "You're the janitor," she said finally. "Yeah. And you're telling me my AI platform is wrong. I'm telling you why it's wrong. There's a difference." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" This was the moment. The cliff edge. Adrian could feel the drop beneath him, could feel every safe choice pulling him backward. But he'd already jumped, really. The second he opened his mouth, he'd left solid ground. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said. 4 years ago, I was the lead systems architect at Neurosphere Technologies. I designed predictive algorithms for financial markets. Before that, I published 17 papers on machine learning architecture and recursive bias patterns. I've got a master's from Carnegie Mellon and enough conference presentations to bore you for a week. Neurosphere. Vivian's voice went cold. That was the company that crashed their own algorithm, cost investors $40 million. 50, actually, but who's counting? And you were the architect. I was the architect who warned them it would fail. They buried my report and blamed me anyway. So yeah, I was the architect. Also the scapegoat. Adrian crossed his arms. "You don't have to believe me, but you're about to lose $100 million because nobody in that room understands recursive bias amplification. And I do. So you can either keep being impressed by degrees and suits, or you can listen to the guy with the mop who actually knows what he's talking about." The hallway went very quiet. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. Outside, traffic hummed against the windows. Vivian stood in the conference room doorway, looking at Adrian like he was a puzzle she hadn't decided whether to solve or throw away. Then she stepped back, held the door open. 30 seconds, she said. "Explain it to me." Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This was every bad decision he'd spent 3 years avoiding. He picked up his mop, set it carefully against the wall, and walked into the conference room that held his past, his present, and maybe, possibly, some sliver of his future. The whiteboard loomed in front of him, covered in architecture diagrams and code fragments. Adrian studied it for 10 seconds, confirming what he'd already suspected. Then he picked up a marker. "Your AI learns in cycles," he said, drawing as he talked. "Each cycle, it processes new data, generates conclusions, then feeds those conclusions back into the next cycle. That's normal. That's how learning works. He drew a simple loop: input to process to output to input. The problem is here. He tapped the arrow between output and input. You've weighted this feedback path at 0.97. That means the AI trusts its own previous conclusions 97%, as much as it trusts new external data, which sounds reasonable until you realize what happens over time. Adrian drew a second diagram, showing the same loop, but with the feedback arrow getting thicker with each iteration. Cycle 1, the AI makes a conclusion that's 92% accurate. Not bad. Cycle 2, it uses that 92% conclusion to inform its next analysis. But because it trusts itself so much, it barely adjusts based on new data. So now it's at 90% accuracy. Cycle 3, 87%. Cycle 4, 82. The errors don't just accumulate, they amplify. The AI is so confident in its own voice that it stops listening to the world. He turned to face Vivian. Your system isn't broken. It's narcissistic. And narcissists don't learn. They just get louder. Vivian stared at the whiteboard. At the diagrams Adrian had drawn in 30 seconds that explained what 12 PhDs couldn't solve in 3 days. Her expression was unreadable. So how do you fix it? She asked quietly. 2 changes. First, drop the self-reinforcement coefficient from 0.97 to 0.55. Make the AI trust new data more than its own history. Second, add an external validation gate, independent sources that the AI has to check against before it incorporates its own conclusions. Force it to reality test itself. That's it? That's it. And you know this will work because I designed a system almost identical to this at Neurosphere. I warned them about this exact failure mode. They ignored me, and the system collapsed exactly the way I said it would. Adrian set the marker down. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but I wasn't wrong about that. Vivian was silent for a long time. She walked to the whiteboard, studied Adrian's diagrams with the kind of focus that probably made her executives nervous. Then she pulled out her phone. David, she said when someone answered, get back to the office, now. Bring Chen and Rodriguez. I don't care if they're asleep. Wake them up. She paused. Because I think I just found our solution. She hung up and looked at Adrian, really looked at him, like she was seeing him for the first time. What's your daughter's name? She asked. The question caught Adrian completely off guard. What? You said you work night shift. That usually means kids. So what's her name? Emma. She's 7. Vivian nodded slowly. Wait here. She left the conference room. Adrian stood alone with his diagrams and his rapidly accelerating heartbeat, trying to figure out what the hell he'd just done. Through the glass wall, he could see other parts of the building lighting up. People arriving, the machine waking up. This was either the smartest or dumbest thing he'd done in 4 years. Probably both. 20 minutes later, the conference room was full. David Thornton had arrived looking furious and confused in equal measure. 2 other engineers, Chen and Rodriguez apparently, sat at the table with laptops open and coffee going cold. Vivian stood at the head of the room like a general preparing for war, and Adrian stood by the whiteboard acutely aware that he was still wearing his janitor's uniform. This is Adrian Cole, Vivian said without preamble. He's going to explain why our AI platform is failing. Listen carefully. Thornton's face went through several interesting colors. Ma'am, with all respect, this is not a discussion. Vivian's voice could have frozen nitrogen. Mr. Cole has 30 seconds. If his explanation doesn't make sense, we'll move on. But right now he's the only person in this building with a theory that fits the data, so he gets 30 seconds. She looked at Adrian, nodded. Adrian took a breath and started talking. He explained the recursive bias pattern, the overweighted self-reinforcement. The way confidence became arrogance became complete detachment from reality. He used the whiteboard, drew diagrams, cited the original research papers that Thornton's team had apparently implemented without understanding the failure conditions. It took him 4 minutes, not 30 seconds, but nobody stopped him. When he finished, the room was silent. Chen and Rodriguez were staring at their laptops with expressions of dawning horror. Thornton looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Run the simulation, Vivian said to Chen. Drop the coefficient to 0.55, add the validation gate. Let's see what happens. Chen's fingers flew across the keyboard. The room held its breath. Numbers started appearing on her screen. Accuracy percentages, error rates, confidence intervals. Green. Everything was turning green. Holy shit, Rodriguez whispered. It's working. The platform is stabilizing. Adrian felt something in his chest unclench. Something that had been tight for 4 years. Accuracy back to 91% and climbing, Chen reported. Error rate dropping below threshold. System confidence realigning with actual performance. She looked up, eyes wide. This is it. This is the fix. The room erupted. Chen and Rodriguez started talking over each other, running additional tests, confirming the results. Thornton stood very still, looking at Adrian like he was seeing a ghost. Vivian walked over to where Adrian stood by the whiteboard. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else. Something sharp and calculating. "Who are you really?" she asked quietly, so only he could hear. "I told you, I'm the guy who saw this coming 4 years ago. Nobody listened then either. Neurosphere buried your warnings. Buried me too. My name's poison in this industry. You can Google it if you want. Plenty of people wrote articles about the arrogant architect who crashed his own company. But that's not what happened." "No, but it's the story everyone believes." Vivian studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to address the room. "Chen Rodriguez, I want full documentation of this fix by tomorrow morning. Thornton, you're going to explain to me how we implemented a system with a critical flaw that, she glanced at Adrian, that someone outside the team spotted in 30 seconds. Thornton's jaw worked. "Ma'am, I don't think it's appropriate to—" "I don't care what you think is appropriate. I care about results. And the results are that this man just saved our company while you've been running in circles for 3 days. She turned back to Adrian. "My office. Now." Adrian followed her out of the conference room, past staring employees, past the elevators to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that cost more than his car. Vivian closed the door, gestured to a chair. "Sit." Adrian sat. Vivian didn't. She paced behind her desk like a caged predator. "I'm going to ask you a question," she said, "and I need you to be honest with me. Can you do that?" "Depends on the question." "Did you sabotage Neurosphere?" Adrian almost laughed. "No." "Did you make mistakes in the architecture?" "Everybody makes mistakes. But the fatal flaw wasn't mine. I documented it. I warned them. They ignored me because fixing it would have delayed their launch by 6 months. When the system crashed, they needed someone to blame. I was convenient. Can you prove that?" "Could 4 years ago. Had emails, meeting notes, my original reports. Submitted all of it during the investigation. Didn't matter. Neurosphere had better lawyers and a more believable story." Vivian stopped pacing. "What if I told you I could get access to Neurosphere's internal records? The real ones. Not the public documentation." Adrian's heart started beating faster. "I'd ask why you'd waste your time. Because you just saved my company. And because I don't like mysteries." She leaned against her desk. "I'm going to make some calls, pull some records, see what really happened 4 years ago. If your story checks out, if you really did warn them and they buried it, then we're going to have a very different conversation than the one I thought we'd be having tonight. And if my story doesn't check out, then you're a brilliant liar who got lucky with a good theory. Either way, I'll know the truth by tomorrow." Vivian picked up her phone. "You're free to go. I'll have security validate your exit time, so nobody questions why you were in my office at 2 a.m. Adrian stood up. He should leave, should take the win and get out before things got complicated. Instead, he heard himself say, "Just so you know, Thornton's your leak." Vivian went very still. "Excuse me? The reason Neurosphere's records disappeared. The reason my warnings never made it to the board. Someone scrubbed them from the system. Thornton was a senior engineer at Neurosphere 4 years ago. He left 3 months before the crash, right around the time my reports vanished." Adrian met her eyes. "I can't prove it. But if you're pulling records, you might want to check who had access to the documentation servers. Just a thought." He left before she could respond, took the elevator down 47 floors, and clocked out at 2:16 a.m. Mrs. Chen was asleep in her chair when Adrian picked up Emma. He left $40 on the table, more than he could afford, less than she deserved, and carried his daughter home through streets that were empty, except for shadows and possibilities. Emma stirred as he tucked her into bed. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" Did you save the world tonight? Adrian smiled in the darkness. Not the whole world, just a little piece of it. That's good, Emma mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. The world needs saving. Adrian kissed her forehead and walked to the window. Somewhere across the city, Vivian Hart was making phone calls. Somewhere in a database, the truth about what happened at Neurosphere was either waiting to be found or had been erased so completely it might as well have never existed. Either way, Adrian had done something tonight he hadn't done in 4 years. He'd stopped being invisible, and he had no idea if that was going to save him or destroy him all over again. Adrian didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma breathe in the next room, and ran through every possible outcome of what he'd just done. Most of them ended badly. A few ended catastrophically. None of them felt safe. By 6 a.m., he'd given up pretending. He made coffee with shaking hands, burned the first batch of eggs, managed the second. Emma shuffled into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and a rabbit tucked under one arm. "You look weird," she said, climbing into her chair. "Thanks, kiddo." "No, I mean like nervous weird. Did something happen?" Adrian set her plate down, tried to smile. "Just didn't sleep great. Bad dreams." Emma studied him with the kind of perception that 7-year-olds shouldn't have but often did when they'd watched their mom die and their dad struggle. "You always say that when you're lying. I'm not—" Adrian stopped, sighed. "Okay. Something happened at work. Might be good, might be bad. Won't know for a while." "Did you get fired?" "No." "Did you get promoted?" "Not exactly." Emma stabbed at her eggs. "Grown-ups are confusing." "Yeah, we are." Adrian ruffled her hair. "Eat your breakfast. Mrs. Chen's picking you up at 7:30. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Adrian's stomach dropped as he answered. "Hello? Mr. Cole." Vivian Hart's voice, sharp even through obvious exhaustion. "We need to talk. Can you come to my office this morning?" "I work tonight. I can't just—" "I'll pay you for the time. Double your hourly rate. This is important." Adrian glanced at Emma, who was watching him with those 2 old eyes. "What time?" 10 a.m. "Ask for me at the executive reception. They'll be expecting you." She hung up before he could respond. Adrian set the phone down, realized his hands were shaking again. "Was that about the thing?" Emma asked. "Yeah." "Is it the good kind of important or the bad kind?" Adrian wished he knew. "Guess I'll find out." Mrs. Chen arrived right on schedule. A tiny woman with gray hair and the kind of smile that made the world feel temporarily safe. She took one look at Adrian and frowned. "You look terrible." "Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. You eating enough? Sleeping?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen." She made a noise that suggested she didn't believe him but wasn't going to argue in front of Emma. "Come on, little one. Let's get you to school." Emma hugged Adrian hard before leaving. "Good luck with the thing," she whispered. "Thanks, baby." After they left, Adrian stood in the kitchen and tried to figure out what the hell you wore to a meeting with a billionaire CEO when your entire wardrobe consisted of janitor uniforms and clothes from the clearance rack at Target. He settled on his least faded jeans and a button-down shirt that only had one barely visible stain. It would have to do. The subway ride downtown felt surreal. Adrian hadn't been to NextCore during business hours in 6 months. The building looked different in daylight, less like a fortress, more like a monument to money and ambition. People in expensive suits flowed in and out of the revolving doors, everyone moving with purpose, everyone belonging. Adrian didn't belong, but he walked in anyway. The executive reception was all marble and glass, designed to intimidate. The woman behind the desk looked up as Adrian approached, her expression professionally neutral until he gave his name. Then something shifted, not quite respect, not quite curiosity. Recognition, maybe. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Hart is expecting you. 47th floor, office 4713. I'll let her assistant know you're on your way up." The elevator was the expensive kind, the type that moved so smoothly you barely felt the ascent. Adrian watched the numbers climb and tried to breathe normally. 47 floors of people who belonged here. And him. The doors opened to a different world. Everything was quieter up here, more refined. The carpet was thicker. The art on the walls was the kind you saw in museums. A woman in her 50s intercepted Adrian before he made it 3 steps from the elevator. "Mr. Cole, I'm Patricia, Miss Hart's executive assistant. She's finishing a call. Can I get you coffee? Water? I'm fine, thanks. Patricia smiled like she'd heard that lie 1,000 times. I'll get you water anyway. Have a seat. She gestured to a waiting area with chairs that probably cost more than Adrian's monthly rent. He sat, felt immediately wrong, stood back up. Through the glass wall, he could see into Vivian's office. She was on the phone, pacing, looking like she'd been awake as long as he had. Patricia returned with water in a glass that was definitely actual crystal. Adrian accepted it, didn't drink. His stomach was too tight for water. 5 minutes passed. 10. Adrian was starting to wonder if this was some kind of power play when Vivian's door opened and she stepped out. She looked different in daylight. Still sharp, still dangerous, but somehow more human. She'd changed clothes since last night. Dark slacks, white blouse, hair down instead of pulled back. Without the CEO armor, she could have been any stressed-out 30-year-old dealing with a crisis, except for her eyes. Those were pure predator. Adrian, come in. He followed her into the office, heard the door close with a very final click. Vivian walked to her desk, but didn't sit. Instead, she picked up a tablet and held it out to him. Read that. Adrian took the tablet. The screen showed a scanned document, old judging by the quality. A report. His report. The one he'd written at Neurosphere 4 years ago, warning about recursive bias patterns in self-learning systems. The one that had supposedly never made it to the board. Where did you get this? His voice came out rougher than intended. Neurosphere's archived servers. Took me 6 hours and 3 very expensive lawyers, but I got access to their backups, the files they thought they'd deleted. Vivian crossed her arms. Your warnings were there. All of them. Detailed, documented, time-stamped. And they were scrubbed from the active system 2 weeks before the algorithm crashed. Adrian's hands were shaking again. He set the tablet down before he dropped it. Who scrubbed them? System administrator account registered to David Thornton. He had full access to the documentation servers. When he left Neurosphere 3 months before the crash, he took his credentials with him. Nobody thought to revoke them. The room tilted. Adrian sat down hard in one of Vivian's expensive chairs. He set me up. He covered his own ass. Thornton was the one who pushed to ignore your warnings. He was the one who convinced the board to accelerate the launch timeline. When the system crashed, he needed a scapegoat, and you were convenient. Vivian's voice was cold, clinical. He deleted the evidence, left the company, and took a job with a NextCore subsidiary 6 months later. Worked his way up to CTO over 3 years. And now he's implementing the same flawed architecture that crashed Neurosphere. Not anymore. Vivian picked up the tablet, swiped to another screen. As of 8:30 this morning, David Thornton is no longer employed by NextCore Technologies. He resigned under pressure, by which I mean I gave him the choice between resigning with a severance package or being fired and having every detail of what he did at Neurosphere leaked to the tech press. Adrian stared at her. You fired your CTO. I accepted his resignation. Because of what I told you. Because of what the evidence showed me. Your tip just pointed me in the right direction. Vivian sat down behind her desk, looked at Adrian with an expression he couldn't quite read. You were telling the truth. About all of it. Neurosphere destroyed your career to protect someone who's now proven he'll make the same mistakes twice. Something cracked in Adrian's chest. 4 years of carrying that weight, of knowing he was right and having nobody believe him, of watching his name get dragged through the industry while the real culprit walked away clean. And now this woman he'd met 12 hours ago was sitting across from him saying the words he'd needed to hear for so long, they'd started to feel imaginary. I don't know what to say, he managed. You don't have to say anything, but you do have to make a decision. Vivian leaned forward. I want to offer you a position. Senior Systems Architect, AI Division. You'd be reporting directly to me until we hire a new CTO. Salary is $400,000 base, plus equity and bonuses. Full benefits. Relocation assistance if you need it. Adrian's brain short-circuited. 400? That's the starting offer. Non-negotiable downward, but we can discuss upward adjustments based on deliverables. Vivian slid a folder across the desk. I need someone I can trust, someone who sees the problems before they become catastrophic, someone who won't bury warnings to hit a deadline. You've proven you're that person. Adrian opened the folder. Contract details. Numbers that looked fake. A job description that read like something from his old life before everything fell apart. Why? The word came out before he could stop it. You don't know me. I mopped your floors yesterday. Yesterday, you were a janitor who saw what 12 PhDs missed. Before that, you were a systems architect who warned a company about a fatal flaw they ignored. Before that, you published papers that people in my industry still cite. Vivian's expression softened fractionally. You made a mistake trusting the wrong people. That doesn't make you incompetent. It makes you human. I've been out of the industry for 4 years. My skills are outdated. My network is gone. Your name is about to be rehabilitated. Vivian pulled up something on her computer, turned the screen so Adrian could see. It was a press release, already drafted, ready to send. NextCore Technologies is pleased to announce the appointment of Adrian Cole as Senior Systems Architect. Mr. Cole brings extensive experience in AI platform development and has already contributed critical solutions to our flagship neural network infrastructure. His expertise in identifying and correcting recursive bias patterns has proven invaluable. Adrian stopped reading. You're going public with this. I'm going public with the fact that you saved our platform. I'm also going public with what happened at Neurosphere if you want. We can name Thornton. We can show the evidence. We can make sure everyone knows you were right. That'll destroy him. He destroyed you first. I have a daughter, Adrian said quietly. Emma. She's 7. I've built a life around being her dad. Stable hours, predictable schedule. This job, $400,000 sounds great, but what if I fail? What if I can't do this anymore? What if you're making a mistake? Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My father started this company in a garage 32 years ago. Died of a heart attack when I was 23. Left me with a board of directors who thought I was too young, too female, too inexperienced to run anything. They voted to replace me. I fought them, won, fired half of them. She met Adrian's eyes. I've made a lot of hiring decisions in 7 years. Some worked out, some didn't. But I've never offered someone a job I didn't believe they could do. And I believe you can do this. Adrian looked down at the contract. At the salary that would mean Emma could have new clothes instead of hand-me-downs. Could mean a real apartment instead of the one bedroom with the clanking radiator. Could mean he'd stop lying awake at night doing math about which bills to pay first. But it also meant stepping back into the world that had chewed him up. Meant trusting people again. Meant being visible. I need time to think about it, he said. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and I start interviewing other candidates. Vivian stood up, extended her hand. I hope you say yes, Adrian, but I'll understand if you don't. Adrian shook her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, nothing tentative about it, and left the office with the contract folder tucked under his arm. Patricia smiled at him on the way out. Good meeting? I have no idea, Adrian said honestly. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. 47 floors of thinking time. By the time Adrian hit the lobby, he'd talked himself into accepting, rejecting, accepting again, and then rejecting for completely different reasons. His phone rang as he pushed through the revolving doors. Marcus, the night supervisor. Adrian, hey, listen, I heard something weird. Someone said you were in a meeting with the CEO this morning. That true? Word traveled fast. Yeah, it's true. Everything okay? You're not in trouble or anything? No, opposite, actually. I think I might have just been offered a promotion. Marcus laughed. From night janitor to what, day janitor? That's not much of a promotion. Something like that. Adrian couldn't explain it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Listen, I might need to take a personal day tonight. Think you can cover? Sure, yeah, but Adrian, you sure you're okay? You sound, I don't know, different. I'm fine, just dealing with some stuff. I'll call you later. Adrian hung up and stood on the sidewalk outside NextCore headquarters, watching people in suits hurry past like they knew exactly where they belonged. The folder under his arm felt heavy, not physically, but in every other way that mattered. He needed to talk to someone. Mrs. Chen would listen, but she'd tell him to take the job without hesitation, and he needed perspective, not validation. Emma was too young to understand what he was asking. Sarah was dead. That left exactly nobody. Adrian walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, bought the cheapest thing on the menu, and sat in the back corner with the contract spread out on the table. The numbers still looked fake. The The job description still read like something from his old life. $400,000, full benefits, equity. And all he had to do was trust that Vivian Hart wouldn't destroy him the way David Thornton had. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. This is Vivian. I know you're processing, but I need you to understand something. I don't make offers I don't mean, and I don't keep people around who lie to me. If you take this job, I will expect excellence. I will also expect honesty. If you can't give me both, say no now. If you can, say yes, and let's change the world. VH. Adrian stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, I'll give you an answer by tomorrow morning. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, fair enough? He put his phone away and tried to drink his coffee. It was terrible, but it was warm, and right now, that was enough. The afternoon dragged. Adrian picked up Emma from school, took her to the park, pushed her on the swings while his mind ran circles around the same questions. Emma noticed, because of course she did. You're doing the thing again, she said from the top of the slide. What thing? The thinking too hard thing. Your face gets all scrunchy. Adrian tried to relax his face. Just got some big decisions to make. Emma slid down, landed in the wood chips, brushed herself off. About the work thing? Yeah. Is it a good decision or a bad decision? Don't know yet. That's why it's hard. Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Mom used to say you should make decisions based on who you want to be, not who you're scared of being. Adrian's throat tightened. She said that? Yeah, when she was sick. I heard her telling you one night when she thought I was asleep. Emma grabbed his hand. I think she meant you should be brave. They walked home as the sun started setting, Emma chattering about her day, Adrian half listening and half thinking about Sarah. She'd been good at decisions. Decisive in a way Adrian had never managed. When she got sick, she'd made a list of everything that needed to happen, legal stuff, medical stuff, Emma's future, and just started working through it. No drama, no existential crisis. Just, here's the problem, here's the solution, let's go. Adrian missed that clarity. Missed having someone who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. By the time they got home, he'd made up his mind, then changed it back. Emma went to bed at 8:30. Adrian sat at the kitchen table with the contract and tried to imagine what saying yes would mean. New life, new identity, new risks, but also new possibilities. Emma in a good school, real health care, a future that didn't involve calculating which bills to skip each month. His phone buzzed. Text from Vivian. The press got wind of Thornton's resignation. They're asking questions. I need to release a statement by tomorrow morning. Your answer affects what that statement says. No pressure. Adrian laughed, but it came out bitter. No pressure. Right. He pulled out his laptop, ancient thing, barely functional, and started Googling. First, he looked up David Thornton. Found recent interviews where Thornton talked about integrity and innovative leadership. Found puff pieces about his rise to CTO. Found absolutely nothing about Neurosphere or buried warnings or scapegoated architects. Then he looked up Vivian Hart. Found 100 articles about the youngest female CEO in the tech sector. Found profiles that called her brilliant, ruthless, visionary. Found exactly 3 photos where she was smiling, and even those looked strategic. Finally, he looked up himself. Found the old articles about Neurosphere's collapse. Found his name mentioned in half of them, always in the context of failed architecture or insufficient oversight. Found one particularly brutal piece that called him a cautionary tale about unchecked ambition in young engineers. None of them mentioned his warnings. None of them mentioned the buried reports. None of them mentioned that he'd been telling the truth. Adrian closed the laptop and stared at the contract. 24 hours to decide who he wanted to be. He thought about Emma asking if he'd saved the world. Thought about Vivian offering him a second chance. Thought about 4 years of being invisible, being safe, being nobody. Thought about Sarah saying you should make decisions based on who you want to be. At 11 p.m., Adrian picked up his phone and typed, I'll take the job, but I have conditions. Vivian's response came back in 30 seconds. Name them. Adrian took a breath and started typing. 1. Complete transparency in all project documentation. No buried reports, no deleted warnings, no covering up mistakes to hit deadlines. 2. If I see a problem, I say something. You might not always agree, but I need to know you'll listen. 3. My daughter comes first. If she needs me, I leave. Meeting, deadline, doesn't matter. 4. You release a statement about Neurosphere, full details, Thornton's name attached. I want my reputation back. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Then, conditions accepted. 1 addition. You start Monday. We need to rebuild the AI team and I want you leading it. Salary negotiation happens tomorrow. Bring your daughter to the office this weekend. I'll have HR set up childcare options. Welcome to NextCore, Adrian. Adrian set the phone down, stared at the ceiling, waited for the panic to hit. It didn't. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope. Terrifying, dangerous, absolutely reckless hope. He walked to Emma's room, watched her sleep for a minute. Then he whispered, "Guess I'm being brave, baby girl. Hope Mom would be proud." Emma didn't wake up, but somewhere, Adrian thought maybe Sarah was smiling. Morning came too fast and too slow. Adrian called Marcus before dawn, explained he wouldn't be coming back to the night shift. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Good for you, man. I always knew you were too smart for mopping floors." "Thanks for everything, Marcus, really. Take care of that kid of yours. And hey, when you're running the world, remember the little people." Adrian promised he would. Then he called Mrs. Chen and tried to explain that everything was about to change. She cried, which made him cry, which made Emma cry when she woke up and found them both teary in the kitchen. "What happened?" Emma demanded. "Is someone dead?" "No, kiddo, opposite. Something good happened, really good." "Like what?" Adrian knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Like I got a new job. Better job. Which means we can move to a nicer place, and you can go to a better school, and we don't have to worry about money as much." Emma's eyes went wide. "Are we rich?" "Not rich, but comfortable. Definitely comfortable." "Does this mean I can get new shoes? Mine have a hole." Adrian's chest tightened. "Yeah, baby. You can get new shoes, whatever you want." Emma threw her arms around his neck and squeezed hard enough to hurt. "You did save the world." "Just a little piece of it," Adrian said again. But this time, he almost believed it. At 9 a.m., Adrian walked back into NextCore wearing the same clothes as yesterday because they were still the best he had. Patricia was waiting at the elevator with a smile that looked genuinely warm. "Congratulations, Mr. Cole. Miss Hart is waiting for you." Vivian's office felt different today. Less intimidating, more like a place where work happened. She was on the phone when Adrian walked in, but gestured for him to sit. He caught pieces of the conversation, something about press statements and strategic communications, and making sure the narrative was controlled. She hung up and looked at Adrian. "We're releasing the statement in 2 hours. I wanted you to see it first." She pulled it up on her screen, turned it so he could read. NextCore Technologies announces leadership changes in AI division. David Thornton has resigned as CTO to pursue other opportunities. In related news, we are pleased to announce the appointment of Adrian Cole as Senior Systems Architect. Mr. Cole's expertise in neural network architecture and recursive bias correction has already proven invaluable to our platform's stability. Additionally, NextCore wishes to publicly acknowledge that Mr. Cole's professional reputation was unfairly damaged by incomplete reporting surrounding the 2022 Neurosphere Technologies incident. Recent evidence shows Mr. Cole provided accurate warnings about system failures that were subsequently deleted from company records. NextCore is committed to transparency and accountability in all technical decisions. Adrian read it twice. "You're really doing this." "I told you I would. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Because the tech press is going to have questions. Your old colleagues are going to have opinions. This is going to be public and messy and probably uncomfortable." "I've been uncomfortable for 4 years. I can handle a few more months." Vivian smiled, and for the first time it looked real. "Good. Because we have a lot of work to do. The AI platform is stable for now, but Thornton left a lot of other messes in his wake. I need you to audit the entire architecture, identify vulnerabilities, recommend fixes. Think you can handle that?" Adrian thought about the whiteboard, about the elegant simplicity of the solution he'd seen in 30 seconds. Thought about years of knowledge and instinct that had been sitting dormant while he pushed a mop. "Yeah," he said, "I can handle that." "Then let's get started." Vivian wasn't kidding about getting started. Within an hour, Adrian found himself in a conference room with three engineers he'd never met, a whiteboard covered in system diagrams, and a laptop that was newer than anything he'd touched in 4 years. The engineers introduced themselves: Kumar, a soft-spoken guy in his 40s who specialized in neural networks; Jessica, mid-20s and sharp-eyed, who handled data pipeline architecture; and Robert, older than everyone else in the room, gray at the temples, who apparently ran infrastructure security. They all looked at Adrian like he was a bomb that might explode at any second. "So," Kumar said carefully, "you're the janitor who fixed our platform." "Former janitor," Adrian corrected. "And I didn't fix it. I just pointed out what was broken." "Right." Jessica exchanged a glance with Kumar. "Look, no offense, but Thornton handpicked this team. Some of us have been here 5 years. We've built this system from the ground up, and now you're just, what, walking in to tell us we did it wrong?" Adrian set down the laptop. Thornton also buried evidence that would have saved Neurosphere $40 million. So maybe his judgment isn't the gold standard we should be aiming for. The room went quiet. Robert leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You got proof of that? Or are we just taking your word?" "Vivian has the proof. Archived server logs, deleted documentation, the whole thing. You want to see it? Ask her." Adrian pulled up the system architecture on the laptop screen. "But right now, I don't care about Thornton. I care about this." He gestured to the diagram showing NextCore's AI platform. "You've got a neural network that's supposed to learn from user interactions and improve over time. But someone, probably Thornton, implemented a confidence weighting system that makes the AI trust its own conclusions more than external validation. That's why accuracy dropped from 92% to 38% in 2 weeks. The system was eating itself." Jessica frowned. "We dropped the self-reinforcement coefficient like you suggested. Platform's stable now." "Stable isn't fixed. You're treating a symptom, not the disease." Adrian started drawing on the whiteboard. "The problem is deeper than one coefficient. Your entire validation architecture is backwards. You're checking the AI's outputs against its own training data instead of against independent sources, which means if the training data was biased to begin with, the AI just reinforces that bias forever." Kumar leaned forward. "The training data went through 6 rounds of auditing. We vetted it for bias." "You vetted it for obvious bias. Demographics, language patterns, stuff you can measure. But what about structural bias? Assumptions built into how the data was collected, what sources were prioritized, which edge cases were ignored." Adrian drew another diagram showing feedback loops within feedback loops. "Your AI isn't just learning what you taught it, it's learning what you didn't teach it, and those gaps become certainties over time." Robert was studying the whiteboard with an expression Adrian couldn't read. "You're saying we need to rebuild the validation layer from scratch. I'm saying if you don't, this happens again. Maybe not next week, maybe not next month, but eventually, the system hits a bias blind spot, starts trusting itself too much, and you're back to 38% accuracy wondering what went wrong." "That's months of work," Jessica said. "We've got 3 product launches scheduled, clients waiting on features. You're talking about delaying everything to fix a problem that might not even happen." "It will happen," Adrian said flatly. "I've seen it happen. I warned Neurosphere about this exact pattern. They ignored me because fixing it would have delayed their launch. 3 months later, their algorithm crashed so hard it triggered a federal investigation." The room went silent again. Jessica looked at Kumar. Kumar looked at Robert. Robert looked at Adrian. "How long would it take?" Robert asked. "If we did this your way, complete rebuild of the validation architecture." Adrian thought about it. 4 months if we're conservative, 3 if we push. But we'd need full access to the training data sources, direct pipeline to external verification systems, and authority to pause any feature launch that conflicts with validation integrity. "Vivian will never approve that," Jessica said. "The board's already breathing down her neck about quarterly numbers. You're asking her to sacrifice short-term revenue for long-term stability." "Then I'll ask her myself." Adrian stood up, left the conference room before anyone could argue, and walked straight to Vivian's office. Patricia tried to intercept him, but he was moving too fast. "Mr. Cole, she's in a meeting." Adrian knocked once and pushed the door open. Vivian was sitting across from 2 men in suits who looked expensive and annoyed. She glanced up, expression unreadable. "Adrian, I'm in the middle of something." I need 4 months and full authority to rebuild the validation architecture. Your current system is going to fail again. Not might. Will. The two men stared at him like he'd just announced he was on fire. Vivian's expression didn't change. Gentlemen, could you give us a moment? The suits left, looking offended. Vivian waited until the door closed before speaking. You've been on the job for 90 minutes. You really want to start by demanding I halt product development for 4 months? I want to start by making sure your company doesn't implode 6 months from now. But yeah, if that requires halting development, then that's what I'm demanding. Vivian stood up, walked to the window overlooking the city. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, those men are from our largest investor group. They're concerned about the leadership changes. Concerned about whether I can maintain stability after losing my CTO. And you just walked in and proved their point. Adrian's stomach dropped. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. But here's what you need to understand. I run a company worth $3 billion. I answer to a board, to investors, to clients who expect results. I can't just stop everything because you say there's a problem. Even if that problem costs you everything? Even then, Vivian turned to face him. I believe you, Adrian. I believe the validation architecture needs work. But I need you to understand the reality we're operating in. This company has been bleeding credibility for 3 days. We stabilized the platform, but that doesn't mean clients trust us again. We need wins, visible, public wins. Product launches that show we're still innovative, revenue that shows we're still viable. And if the platform crashes mid-launch, then we fail spectacularly instead of slowly. But at least we tried. Vivian sat back down. I'll give you 2 months, not 4. You rebuild what you can in 2 months while the rest of the team continues feature development. After 2 months, we reassess. If your validation architecture proves it's worth the investment, we extend. If not, we integrate what you've built and move on. 2 months isn't enough. 2 months is what you get. Take it or walk. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to explain that rushing a fix was how you ended up with another neurosphere situation, but he could see from Vivian's expression that the decision was final. Fine. 2 months. But I need direct access to the training data and authority to override feature launches if they conflict with validation integrity. You get access. You don't get override authority. Feature launches go through me. Vivian's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned. We're done here. And Adrian? Next time you need to interrupt a meeting, maybe wait until I'm not talking to people who can tank our stock price. Adrian left feeling like he'd won and lost simultaneously. Back in the conference room, the engineering team was exactly where he'd left them, except now they all looked extremely uncomfortable. So, Kumar said, we heard yelling. Not yelling, negotiating. Sounded like yelling. We have 2 months to rebuild the validation architecture, Adrian said. After that, Vivian reassesses, which means we need to move fast. Jessica groaned. I knew you were going to say that. They worked until 9 p.m. that first night. Adrian mapping out the validation architecture, Kumar running simulations, Jessica building data pipelines, Robert stress testing security protocols. By the time Adrian looked up from his laptop, the office had gone dark except for their conference room. We should call it, Robert said. Some of us have families. Adrian checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Chen. His heart stopped. Emma. He grabbed his jacket, was halfway to the elevator before Kumar called after him. Is everything okay? I forgot to pick up my daughter. Adrian ran. Through the lobby into the street, found a cab and threw money at the driver while giving Mrs. Chen's address. His phone rang. He answered without looking. Adrian, where are you? Mrs. Chen sounded worried, not angry. Somehow that made it worse. I'm so sorry I got caught up at work. I'm coming right now. She's fine. Fed her dinner. She did homework. But Adrian, you can't just disappear. She was scared. I know. I'm sorry. I'm 10 minutes away. He made it in 8. Mrs. Chen opened the door looking exhausted. Emma was on the couch, still in her school clothes, hugging her rabbit with both arms. Daddy? Hey, baby girl. Adrian knelt down. I'm so sorry I'm late. Mrs. Chen said you got an important job. Is that why you forgot me? The words hit like a punch. I didn't forget you. I just lost track of time. That's different. Feels the same. Adrian pulled her into a hug. She was stiff at first, then softened. He felt her small hands grip his shirt. I promise this won't happen again, he said. You promised you'd pick me up at 6. I know. And you didn't. I know. Adrian pulled back so he could see her face. You're right. I messed up. But I'm learning how to do this new job, and sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. That doesn't mean I forgot about you. You're the most important thing in my life. Always. Emma studied him with those two old eyes. More important than the job? Way more important. Then why'd you pick the job over me today? Adrian didn't have a good answer for that, so he just held her and promised himself he'd figure out how to balance this before it got worse. Mrs. Chen charged him double that night. He paid without arguing. The next morning, Adrian walked into Vivian's office before she'd had her first coffee. I need flexible hours, he said without preamble. I have to pick up my daughter by 6. If there's a crisis, I'll work from home after she's asleep, but I can't do the 9 to 9 thing, not every day. Vivian looked up from her computer. You lasted 1 day before breaking Condition 3 of your contract. Condition 3 was that my daughter comes first. That's not breaking it, that's enforcing it. Fair point. Vivian took a sip of coffee that was probably cold by now. Flexible hours are fine, but the work still needs to get done. I don't care if you do it at midnight or 6 a.m., just get it done. I will. Good. Now sit down. We need to talk about the press release. Adrian sat. Vivian pulled up her computer screen, turned it so he could see. Tech news sites. All of them running variations of the same headline. Nextcore CTO resigns amid controversy, and former janitor saves billion-dollar AI platform. It went viral, Vivian said, which is good and bad. Good because it shows we're taking accountability seriously. Bad because now everyone wants to interview you. TechCrunch, Wired, Bloomberg, even some mainstream outlets. They want the story of the janitor turned architect who exposed corruption. Adrian's stomach twisted. I don't want to do interviews. You don't have a choice. Part of rehabilitating your reputation means controlling the narrative. If you don't talk, other people fill in the gaps. And trust me, you won't like what they say. I can't talk about Neurosphere without legal clearance. Already handled. Our lawyers cleared the statement, which means you can repeat what's in it. Nothing more, nothing less. Vivian leaned back. I'm scheduling 3 interviews. TechCrunch tomorrow, Bloomberg Wednesday, Wired on Friday. Patricia will prep you on messaging. Keep it simple. You identified a problem. Nextcore listened. We're committed to transparency moving forward. What about Thornton? What about him? He's going to fight this. He's going to claim I'm lying, that the evidence is fabricated, that you're using him as a scapegoat. Vivian smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Let him try. I've got server logs with timestamps, deletion records with his credentials, and 3 independent audits confirming everything in our statement. If Thornton wants to fight, he'll lose, publicly, messily. I'm kind of hoping he's stupid enough to try. Adrian almost felt bad for Thornton. Almost. The interviews were brutal. The TechCrunch reporter was friendly but relentless, asking the same questions in different ways, trying to get Adrian to say something quotable. The Bloomberg journalist was colder, more interested in the financial implications than the personal story. But Wired was the worst. The reporter was young, ambitious, and clearly saw this as her chance to break a major scandal. So let me get this straight, she said, leaning forward with her recorder between them. You warned Neurosphere about a critical flaw. They ignored you, buried your reports, and when the system crashed, they blamed you. Then you spent 4 years working as a janitor while the man who destroyed your career climbed the corporate ladder. That's accurate, Adrian said carefully. And now that same man implemented the same flawed architecture at Nextcore, which you identified and fixed within hours of looking at it. Also accurate. Doesn't that make you angry? Doesn't it feel like the system is rigged against people like you? Adrian thought about that. About 4 years of mopping floors while Thornton gave interviews about innovative leadership. About watching Emma grow up in an apartment with a clanking radiator because nobody believed him when he told the truth. Yeah, he said finally. It makes me angry, but anger doesn't fix broken systems. Evidence does. Accountability does. People like Vivian Hart who are willing to look at the data and admit when something's wrong, even if it costs them politically. The reporter smiled. That's a very diplomatic answer. I've had 4 years to think about it. The article went live 2 days later. The headline read, The Janitor Who Saved Silicon Valley, Adrian Cole's Fight for Redemption. It It was better than Adrian expected, worse than he hoped. The comments section was predictably vicious, half the people calling him a hero, the other half calling him a fraud who got lucky. Adrian stopped reading after the first 50 comments. The validation architecture rebuild was going slower than he wanted. Kumar was brilliant but cautious, wanting to test every change 3 times before implementation. Jessica was fast but reckless, pushing code that worked 90% of the time and breaking things the other 10%. Robert was methodical to the point of paralysis, finding security vulnerabilities in systems that Adrian wasn't even planning to touch. 2 weeks in, they'd completed maybe 30% of the rebuild. Adrian did the math and realized they'd need another month minimum, which meant going back to Vivian and asking for an extension she'd already said she wouldn't give. He found her in her office at 7 a.m., staring at her computer screen with the kind of expression that meant bad news. "We have a problem," she said before Adrian could speak. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where our biggest client just threatened to pull their contract unless we deliver the quarterly feature update on schedule, which is in 6 weeks. Adrian's stomach sank. "The features aren't ready. Half of them conflict with the validation rebuild." "I know, but if we lose Meridian Tech, we lose 18% of our revenue. The board will panic, investors will bail, and everything we've built in the last 3 weeks falls apart." Vivian looked up. "I need you to make a choice, Adrian. Do we prioritize the validation rebuild, or do we prioritize keeping our biggest client?" "That's not a choice. That's asking me whether I want to save the company now or save it later." "Welcome to my world." Adrian paced to the window, looked down at the city waking up below. Somewhere down there, Emma was getting ready for school, eating breakfast, probably wearing the new shoes they'd bought last weekend, the first new shoes she'd had in a year. He thought about what Sarah would say, thought about recursive bias patterns and systems that ate themselves and warnings that got buried because they were inconvenient. "We do both," he said. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "We deliver the quarterly features to Meridian, but we build them on top of the new validation architecture, not the old one. It'll take longer and it'll be harder, but it proves the rebuild works. If we can show Meridian that the features are more stable, more reliable, more accurate than anything they've gotten before, they won't care that it took an extra 2 weeks. That's a hell of a gamble." "So was hiring me." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and this time it looked real. "You've got 4 weeks. Deliver the features and prove the validation architecture works. Pull this off, and I'll give you whatever resources you need to finish the rebuild. Fail, and we're both looking for new jobs. No pressure. Never is with you." Adrian went back to the engineering team and explained the new timeline. Jessica groaned. Kumar looked ill. Robert just shook his head. 4 weeks to do 8 weeks of work, Robert said. "Sure. Why not? I didn't need sleep anyway." They worked 16-hour days. Adrian rearranged his schedule so he could pick up Emma at 6, work from home until she was asleep, then log back in and work until midnight. The team started rotating shifts, Kumar taking mornings, Jessica covering afternoons, Robert handling nights, Adrian coordinating everything in between. Emma noticed the change. She always noticed. "You're tired all the time now," she said one night, while Adrian was making dinner with one hand and reading code on his phone with the other. "Just busy, baby." "Is the job too hard?" Adrian set down his phone, looked at his daughter. "No, it's hard, but it's not too hard. It's just, I'm learning how to do this again. Be good at work and good at being your dad at the same time." "Are you good at both?" "Getting better. Why?" Emma shrugged. "Mrs. Chen says Mom would be proud of you for being brave and taking the job. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Adrian knelt down, pulled her into a hug. "I'm okay. Promise. And Mom would definitely be proud. Of both of us." "I'm not doing anything. You're being patient while I figure this out. That's doing a lot." 3 weeks in, the Meridian features were 60% complete, and the validation architecture was showing promising results. Kumar's simulations indicated 94% accuracy, up from the original 92. Jessica's data pipelines were processing twice as fast as the old system. Robert's security protocols had caught 3 vulnerabilities that would have been catastrophic if they'd gone live. Then everything fell apart. Adrian was working from home, Emma asleep in the next room, when his laptop started throwing error messages. Validation failures across the entire system. Not just the new architecture, everything. The platform was rejecting queries, flagging legitimate data as corrupt, shutting down processes that had been stable for months. His phone rang. Kumar. Please tell me you're seeing this, Kumar said without preamble. I'm seeing it. What the hell happened? I don't know. 1 minute everything's fine. Next minute, the system's in full panic mode. It's like something triggered a cascade failure in the validation layer. Adrian was already pulling up system logs, tracking the error backwards through the stack. When did it start? 11:43 p.m., right after the automated backup cycle. Backup cycle. Adrian's fingers froze on the keyboard. Did anyone modify the backup protocols recently? Silence on the other end. Then Kumar said very quietly, "Oh no." What? Jessica pushed an update to the backup system yesterday. Said it would optimize storage allocation. I didn't think to check if it conflicted with the validation architecture. Adrian was already calling Jessica. She answered on the fourth ring, groggy. This better be important. Your backup optimization is killing the platform. The validation system is treating the backup data as primary input and the primary data as corruption. Every backup cycle triggers a cascade failure. That's not... Jessica stopped. Oh shit. Yeah. Can you roll it back? Rolling back will corrupt the last 72 hours of backup data. We'll lose everything stored since Monday. And if we don't roll back? The platform crashes completely in about 40 minutes. Adrian checked the time. 11:58 p.m. Vivian was definitely asleep. The Meridian features were supposed to demonstrate in 9 hours, and their entire platform was about to implode because of a storage optimization that nobody had properly vetted. This was Neurosphere all over again. Different company, same problem. Someone making changes without understanding the full system impact. And now Adrian had to choose between bad options and worse options. Don't roll back yet, he said. Give me 15 minutes. Adrian, we don't have 15 minutes. Then I'll work fast. He pulled up the validation architecture, started tracing through the code looking for where the backup data was entering the system. Found it. The problem was obvious once he saw it. Jessica's optimization had changed the data timestamp format, and the validation layer was interpreting newer backups as older than the primary data. So it thought the backups were the truth, and the current state was corrupted. Simple fix. Change one timestamp parser. 3 lines of code. Adrian wrote the fix, tested it locally, deployed it to the development environment. The errors stopped. The system stabilized. He checked the time. 12:11 a.m. They'd had maybe 2 minutes before complete failure. His phone rang again. Kumar. I don't know what you just did, but it worked. System's green across the board. Jessica's backup optimization was conflicting with the validation timestamp logic. I rewrote the parser. In 15 minutes. In 12, actually. Kumar laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical. You just saved us from a catastrophic failure with 12 minutes of work. That's either genius or insane. Can it be both? They stayed on the call until 1 a.m., monitoring the system to make sure the fix held. It did. By 1:30, Adrian was confident enough to log off and try to sleep. He checked on Emma first. She'd kicked off her blanket again. He tucked her back in, kissed her forehead, and stood in her doorway thinking about how close he'd just come to losing everything again. Vivian called at 6 a.m. I got an alert about system instability last night, she said. No greeting, no small talk. Want to tell me what happened? Adrian explained. The backup optimization, the timestamp conflict, the cascade failure, the fix. When he finished, Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, you fixed a catastrophic system failure in 12 minutes. Technically 11 and a half. Adrian. Yeah? That's the kind of thing that makes investors very nervous or very excited. Nervous because it means our system was vulnerable. Excited because it means we have someone who can fix vulnerabilities that fast. Which are they? Haven't decided yet, but I'm leaning toward excited. Vivian paused. The Meridian demo is at 10. You coming in? I'll be there. Good. And Adrian, thank you for not letting us crash. The Meridian demo went perfectly. The features worked. The validation architecture held. The client representatives actually looked impressed, which, according to Jessica, was basically impossible. Afterwards, Vivian pulled Adrian aside. They're extending the contract, she said. 3 more years, 20% increase in value. Because, and I quote, the platform's stability and accuracy improvements are exactly what we needed. Adrian felt something unclench in his chest. So we did it. You did it. Vivian held out her hand. 4 months to finish the validation rebuild. Whatever resources you need. No arguing with the board. Adrian shook her hand, and for the first time since taking this job, he felt like maybe he actually belonged here. That night, he picked up Emma on time, took her for ice cream, and told her about the crisis and the fix and the client who was happy. She listened with serious attention, then said, "So you saved the world again." "Just a little piece of it," Adrian said for the third time. But this time, sitting in an ice cream shop with his daughter, watching her get chocolate on her nose, he thought maybe that little piece was enough. The ice cream shop moment didn't last. Reality had a way of crashing back in when you least expected it. Adrian got the call 3 days later while he was in the middle of a team meeting. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him step into the hallway and pick up. "Adrian Cole?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Michael Reeves. I'm an attorney representing David Thornton. I'd like to discuss the recent statements made by NextCore Technologies regarding my client's employment history." Adrian's blood went cold. "I have nothing to say to you." "Mr. Cole, I understand this is uncomfortable, but my client's reputation has been significantly damaged by allegations that we believe are false and defamatory. We're prepared to file suit against both you and NextCore unless these statements are retracted and a public apology is issued. Your client buried evidence and destroyed my career, so no, I'm not retracting anything. The evidence you're referring to has not been independently verified. NextCore's internal audit is hardly an unbiased source. If this goes to court, we'll demand access to the original Neurosphere servers, and I'm confident we'll find that these so-called deletion logs have been manipulated." Adrian wanted to hang up, wanted to tell this lawyer exactly where he could shove his lawsuit, but he remembered Vivian's warning about controlling the narrative. "Send whatever legal threats you want to NextCore's legal department. I'm done talking." He hung up before Reeves could respond, stood in the hallway trying to get his breathing under control. Through the glass wall of the conference room, he could see Kumar and Jessica waiting, looking concerned. Adrian walked back in. "Where were we?" "Everything okay?" Kumar asked. "Fine, just a spam call." Jessica didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing code, but Adrian's mind kept drifting back to the lawyer's voice. "We're prepared to file suit. We'll demand access to the servers. The deletion logs have been manipulated." What if they had been? What if Vivian's lawyers had found what they expected to find because they were looking for a specific narrative? What if Adrian had just traded one scapegoat situation for another? He stayed late that night after everyone else had gone home, pulled up the archived server logs from Neurosphere, and started reading through them line by line. He wasn't a lawyer, didn't know what would hold up in court, but he knew code, knew systems, knew when timestamps made sense and when they'd been tampered with. 3 hours later, he was confident the logs were legitimate. The deletion timestamps matched Thornton's access patterns. The file metadata was consistent. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Thornton had scrubbed the warnings, covered his tracks, and let Adrian take the fall. Adrian's phone buzzed. Text from Vivian. "Legal called me about Thornton's lawyer. You okay?" He typed back, "Fine. They have anything to worry about?" "Not unless you count wasting billable hours. Our evidence is solid." Adrian wanted to believe that. But he'd believed his evidence was solid 4 years ago, too. And look where that got him. He shut down his laptop, headed home, and found Emma still awake despite it being past 10 p.m. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen, working on what looked like a science project. "Daddy!" Emma jumped up. "Look what we're making. It's a volcano." Adrian forced a smile. "That's great, baby, but it's late. You should be asleep." "Mrs. Chen said I could stay up until you got home." He looked at Mrs. Chen, who shrugged apologetically. "She was worried. Said you sounded weird on the phone earlier." Adrian had called at 6 to say he'd be late. Must not have hidden the stress as well as he thought. "I'm fine," he told Emma. "Just a long day." "You say that a lot now." "Because I have a lot of long days." Emma studied him with those eyes that saw too much. "Is someone being mean to you again? Like before?" Before. She meant neurosphere, meant the year when Adrian had been too angry and too broken to hide it, when even a 7-year-old could tell something was destroying her father from the inside. No one's being mean, Adrian said, kneeling down so he was eye level with her. Just some complicated grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. But you're worried. A little bit, but that's my job. Being worried so you don't have to be. Emma hugged him tight. I wish you didn't have to be worried either. Yeah, Adrian whispered into her hair. Me too. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. Adrian found out when Vivian called him into her office at 8 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept. Their head of legal was there too, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had the kind of sharp intelligence that made Adrian nervous. Thornton's suing for defamation, wrongful termination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, Margaret said without preamble. He's asking for $20 million in damages plus legal fees. Adrian sat down hard. $20 million. It's a scare tactic, Vivian said. He knows he won't get that, but he's betting we'll settle to avoid the publicity. Are we going to settle? Hell no! Vivian's expression was pure ice. We have the evidence. We have the timeline. We have independent verification from our auditors. Thornton wants to fight this in court. We'll bury him. Margaret looked less certain. The problem is discovery. If this goes to trial, both sides get access to all internal communications. That means every email, every memo, every meeting note from the last 4 years. Are we confident there's nothing in our records that could be misinterpreted? Like what? Adrian asked. Like conversations about hiring you, about the optics of bringing on a former janitor as senior architect, about whether your story was legitimate or just a convenient narrative to explain Thornton's departure. Adrian's stomach twisted. You think we have emails saying that? I think people gossip, and gossip in writing becomes evidence in litigation. Margaret pulled out a tablet, pulled up what looked like an email chain. This is from our VP of Communications to our PR team, sent the day we announced your hiring. Quote, the janitor angle is perfect. Tech media will eat it up. Makes us look like we value merit over credentials. Unquote. The words hung in the air like smoke. Adrian could see where this was going. So they'll argue I was hired for PR, not because I'm actually qualified. They'll argue you were hired as part of a coordinated campaign to discredit Thornton. That Vivian needed a scapegoat for the platform failure, found you mopping floors, and manufactured a story about buried evidence to justify firing her CTO. That's insane, Vivian said. Adrian saved the platform. He identified the problem in 30 seconds that Thornton's team couldn't solve in 3 days. I know that. You know that. But Thornton's lawyers will say you could have solved it yourself, that Adrian's contribution was minimal, and that the whole redemption narrative was fabricated to justify a predetermined outcome. Adrian felt like he was falling. Different building, different company, same nightmare. His word against someone with better lawyers and a more believable story. What do we do? He asked. Margaret closed her tablet. We prepare for trial. We document everything. We get testimony from Kumar, Jessica, Robert about Adrian's technical contributions. We get expert witnesses to verify the server logs. We build an airtight case that proves every word of our statement was factually accurate. How long will that take? 6 months minimum. Maybe longer if Thornton drags it out. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Adrian, you're going to be under a microscope. Every decision you make at this company, every email you send, every meeting you attend, it's all potential evidence. So I need you to be perfect. No mistakes, no shortcuts. Nothing that can be twisted into proof that you're unqualified for this position. Adrian nodded, but inside he was screaming, perfect. Right. Because that was totally achievable while rebuilding a validation architecture, managing a team, raising a daughter, and dealing with lawyers who wanted to destroy him. The meeting ended. Vivian walked Adrian back to his office, closed the door. I'm not settling, she said quietly. I want you to know that. Thornton doesn't get to rewrite history just because he's got lawyers. What if Margaret's right? What if there are emails that make this look bad? Then we'll explain the context. But I'm not throwing you under the bus to make this go away. That's not how I operate. Adrian wanted to believe her, but he'd heard similar promises before. The lawsuit became public knowledge within 48 hours. Tech news sites ran with it immediately. Former CTO strikes back, Thornton sues NextCore for $20 million, and Janitor Architect's story faces legal challenge. And worst of all, Was Adrian Cole's redemption too good to be true? The comment sections were brutal. Half the people saying they knew all along it was a publicity stunt, the other half saying Thornton was obviously guilty, and this was just a desperate man trying to salvage his reputation. Nobody seemed interested in waiting for actual evidence. Kumar found Adrian in the conference room at lunch, staring at his laptop without really seeing it. "You okay?" "People think I'm a fraud. People are idiots." Kumar sat down across from him. "I've worked with you for 6 weeks now. I've seen what you can do. Anyone who thinks you're unqualified is either blind or stupid. Thornton's lawyers will say you have to defend me because you're on my team. Thornton's lawyers can go to hell." Kumar leaned forward. "Look, I don't know what happened at Neurosphere. I don't know if the server logs are real or fake or somewhere in between. But I know you fixed our platform. I know you caught that backup failure in 12 minutes. I know you see patterns in code that I've been staring at for months and somehow missed. That's not PR. That's not narrative. That's just who you are." Adrian's throat was tight. "Thanks. Don't thank me. Just keep doing the work. The rest of it will sort itself out." Except it didn't sort itself out. It got worse. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, someone leaked internal NextCore emails to TechCrunch. Not the PR emails Margaret had mentioned, but worse. Messages between board members questioning whether hiring Adrian had been wise, whether his technical contributions were being exaggerated, whether Vivian was letting personal bias cloud her judgment. One email in particular went viral. Board member Richard Hastings to another board member, "I appreciate Vivian's commitment to second chances, but bringing on someone with Cole's history feels reckless. If this blows up in our faces, we're all liable." The article's headline, "NextCore board had doubts about Adrian Cole from day one." Adrian read it sitting in his apartment at midnight, Emma asleep in the next room. He read it 3 times, feeling each word like a physical blow. The board thought he was reckless. The board thought he was a liability. The board thought Vivian had made a mistake. His phone rang. "Vivian." "Don't read the comments," she said immediately. "Too late." "Adrian, they're right, aren't they? You're bored. You took a risk hiring me, a stupid risk, and now it's blowing up in your face. That's not what's happening." "Then what is happening? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm destroying your company's reputation just by existing." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "Richard Hastings sent that email 3 days after I hired you, before you'd proven anything, before the Meridian deal, before you fixed the backup failure. He was wrong then, and he's wrong now." "What if he wasn't?" "Adrian, listen to me. I have been running this company for 7 years. I have made exactly 2 decisions that I would call genuinely transformative. The first was acquiring the AI division when everyone said it was a waste of money. The second was hiring you. I don't regret either one." "You should regret the second one. I'm going to cost you millions in legal fees." "You already saved me millions in platform stability. We're still ahead." Adrian laughed, but it came out broken. "That's a really clinical way to look at this." "I'm a CEO. Clinical is my default." Vivian paused. "But for what it's worth, this isn't just about numbers. You were right 4 years ago. You're right now, and I'm not going to let Thornton or my board or anyone else rewrite that truth." After she hung up, Adrian sat in the dark for a long time. He thought about Neurosphere, about Sarah, about Emma sleeping in the next room, trusting that her father had things under control. He didn't have things under control. Things were spiraling, and he had no idea how to stop it. The deposition happened 6 weeks later in a conference room that cost probably $1,000 an hour to rent. Thornton's lawyers were exactly what Adrian expected. Expensive suits, practiced smiles, questions designed to trap rather than illuminate. The lead attorney was a man named Harrison Wheeler who looked like he'd been manufactured in a lab to intimidate people. 6'3", silver hair, voice like gravel. "Mr. Cole, how would you characterize your relationship with Miss Hart?" Adrian's lawyer, Margaret, leaned forward. "Objection. Relevance? We're establishing whether there was bias in the hiring process," Wheeler said smoothly. "We're professional colleagues," Adrian said. "Just colleagues? Nothing more personal?" "I'm her employee. She's my boss. That's the relationship." Wheeler smiled. "So you've never socialized outside of work? Never had dinner together? Never discussed anything that wasn't strictly professional?" "We've had working dinners. That's not unusual." "How many?" "I don't know. 5? 6? And during these dinners, did you discuss your personal history, your time at Neurosphere? Sometimes. Did Ms. Hart express sympathy for what happened to you? Margaret interrupted. Where are you going with this? I'm establishing that Ms. Hart had a personal investment in Mr. Cole's redemption narrative, that she saw an opportunity to position herself as someone who values merit over credentials, and Mr. Cole was the perfect vehicle for that narrative. That's not what happened, Adrian said. No? Then explain to me how a janitor with a 4-year employment gap and a failed project on his record becomes a senior architect at a billion-dollar company within 48 hours of meeting the CEO. I identified a critical flaw in their AI platform. I provided the solution. That's how. A solution that conveniently implicated my client as the source of the problem. Your client was the source of the problem. The server logs prove it. Logs that were provided by NextCore's legal team after they'd had 4 years to manufacture whatever evidence they needed. Wheeler leaned back. Mr. Cole, isn't it true that you've been looking for someone to blame for your career failure ever since Neurosphere, and Ms. Hart gave you the perfect target? Adrian's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table, forced himself to breathe. I blamed the people who buried my warnings and let a flawed system go live. If that's your client, then yeah, I blame him, but I didn't manufacture that. I just finally found someone willing to look at the evidence. The deposition lasted 4 hours. By the end, Adrian felt like he'd been beaten with hammers. Margaret walked him out to the street, looking grim. You did fine, she said. I sounded defensive. You sounded honest. That's better. Wheeler's going to argue I'm emotionally compromised, that I can't be objective about Thornton. Let him argue. We've got the technical evidence. That matters more than psychology. Margaret hesitated. But Adrian, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Thornton's team is going to dig into everything. Your finances, your personal life, your relationship with Emma. They're going to look for anything they can use. Emma's 7 years old. What could they possibly use? The fact that you were a single parent working as a janitor. They'll argue you were desperate for money, willing to say anything to get a high-paying job. They'll paint you as someone who saw an opportunity and took it regardless of the truth. Adrian felt sick. They can't bring my daughter into this. They won't have to. The facts speak for themselves. Struggling single dad, dead-end job, suddenly lands a $400,000 position. The optics aren't great. So what do I do? Keep your head down. Do your job. Don't give them ammunition. Margaret checked her phone. And maybe talk to Vivian about being more careful with how you're perceived. No more working dinners alone. No more late-night calls. Everything documented and professional. She left. Adrian stood on the sidewalk feeling like the ground was tilting under his feet. That night, he sat Emma down and tried to explain what was happening. She listened with that serious expression, the one that made her look older than 7. So the bad man from before is saying you're lying? She asked. Yeah, pretty much. But you're not lying. No. Then why doesn't everyone just believe you? Adrian wished he had a good answer. Because sometimes the truth is complicated, and people believe what's easier to believe. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, are we going to have to move again? Like after Mom died? The question hit like a punch. After Sarah died, they'd moved 3 times in 2 years. Cheaper apartments, worse neighborhoods, always one step ahead of bills they couldn't pay. No, Adrian said firmly. We're not moving. I promise. You promised before. I know, but this time it's different. I have a good job. We have savings. Even if things go bad with the lawsuit, we're not going to lose the apartment. Emma nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She'd heard too many promises that didn't hold up. The trial date was set for 4 months out. In the meantime, Adrian threw himself into work like a drowning man clutching debris. The validation architecture rebuild was progressing. The team had expanded to 6 people. They were ahead of schedule. But the lawsuit hung over everything like smoke. Every email Adrian sent was carefully worded. Every decision was documented. Every conversation was professional and distant. Vivian noticed. She found him in his office late one Friday night, everyone else gone home. Knocked on the doorframe even though the door was open. You're avoiding me, she said. Adrian didn't look up from his laptop. I'm following legal advice. Margaret told you to stop talking to me? She told me to be more careful about perception. Solo working dinners don't look great when someone's arguing we have inappropriate personal involvement. Vivian walked in, closed the door, sat down across from him. That's the stupidest thing I've heard all week. It's not stupid. It's strategic. It's letting Thornton control the narrative. That's what he wants. To make you second-guess every decision, every relationship, every moment of progress. He wants you isolated and defensive. Maybe I should be defensive. Wheeler's got a point. The optics are bad. Janitor to architect in 48 hours looks like favoritism. It looks like I recognized talent when I saw it, which is exactly what happened. Vivian leaned forward. Adrian, I didn't hire you because I felt sorry for you. I hired you because you fixed a problem in 30 seconds that my entire team couldn't solve in 3 days. That's merit. That's value. That's the definition of qualified. Wheeler will say I got lucky. Then we'll prove I'm still getting lucky every time you solve a problem. Vivian pulled out her phone, showed him something. Look at this. It was an email from the Meridian client, praising the platform's stability, requesting an expansion of their contract, specifically citing the exceptional improvements to validation accuracy and system reliability. That's because of you, Vivian said. Not because of luck, not because of narrative, because you're good at this. Adrian wanted to believe it, but belief felt dangerous right now. What if we lose the lawsuit? He asked quietly. We won't. But what if we do? What if a jury decides the evidence was manipulated? What if they side with Thornton? Then we appeal, and we keep fighting until we win. And if we never win? Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Adrian wasn't expecting. Then we'll still be right. Even if a court says we're wrong, we'll still be right. The evidence will still exist. The truth will still be true. She met his eyes. I know that doesn't feel like enough right now, but sometimes that's all you get. The knowledge that you told the truth, even when nobody believed you. Adrian thought about 4 years of carrying that knowledge alone. 4 years of being right and having it matter to exactly no one. I don't want to go through that again, he said. You won't, because this time you're not alone. The word settled into something deep in Adrian's chest, something that felt like hope, or maybe just exhaustion pretending to be hope. Okay, he said finally. Okay, what? Okay, I'll stop avoiding you. I'll stop second-guessing everything. I'll just do the work and trust that the truth matters. Vivian smiled. That's all I'm asking. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. By the way, the board meeting is next week. Hastings is going to push for your termination, thinks you're too much of a liability. Adrian's stomach dropped. And I'm going to tell him to go to hell. But it would help if you had something impressive to show, something that proves you're worth the trouble. Like what? Surprise me. After she left, Adrian sat alone in his office staring at his laptop. The validation architecture was good, better than good. But good wasn't impressive. Good didn't prove he was worth a $20 million lawsuit. He pulled up the system specifications, started running scenarios. What if they expanded the validation framework beyond just bias correction? What if they built something that could identify not just errors, but patterns in how errors occurred? A meta layer that learned from the AI's mistakes and prevented entire categories of failure before they happened. It was ambitious. Probably too ambitious for the timeline. But Vivian wanted impressive. Adrian opened a new file and started coding. He worked through this weekend. Emma stayed with Mrs. Chen. The code came together piece by piece, each function building on the last. By Monday morning, he had a prototype. Rough, untested, probably full of bugs, but potentially revolutionary. He brought it to the team meeting. Kumar took one look and said, "This is insane." Good insane or bad insane, Adrian asked. Both. If it works, it's brilliant. If it doesn't, we've wasted 3 weeks of development time on a pipe dream. So let's find out if it works. They tested it for 72 hours straight. The meta-validation layer caught errors the primary system missed, identified bias patterns in training data that would have taken months to spot manually, reduced false positives by 43%. It worked. Not perfectly, but well enough to prove the concept. Adrian compiled the results, packaged them into a presentation, and sent them to Vivian at 2 a.m., the day before the board meeting. She called at 2:15. "Is this real?" she asked without preamble. Prototype is real. Full implementation would take another month. But it works. It works. Vivian laughed. It sounded slightly manic. You built a self-correcting validation framework in one weekend because I told you to surprise me. You said it would help with the board. Adrian, this doesn't just help with the board. This changes everything. If we can implement this across the platform, we're not just fixing our AI. We're setting a new industry standard. So, impressive enough? Impressive enough. The board meeting happened the next afternoon. Adrian wasn't allowed in the room, but Vivian texted him updates. 2:47 p.m. Hastings is arguing for your termination, says the lawsuit exposure is too high. 3:02 p.m. Just showed them your meta-validation prototype. Hastings looks like he swallowed a lemon. 3:23 p.m. Board voted 7-2 to keep you on. Hastings and one other dissent. You're safe. Adrian read that last message 3 times, sitting in his office with his heart hammering. Safe. For now. Maybe longer. Vivian appeared in his doorway 20 minutes later, looking tired but victorious. Hastings wanted your head. I gave him innovation instead. He couldn't argue with the numbers. What numbers? Platform stability up 41% since you started. Client satisfaction up 33%. Meridian contract extended with a value increase of 20%. And now a validation framework that could become our primary competitive advantage. Vivian sat down. You've been here 3 months, Adrian. In 3 months, you've transformed our entire AI division. That's not luck. That's not narrative. That's just exceptional work. Adrian didn't know what to say. After 4 years of being told he was a failure, the praise felt foreign, dangerous even, like something that could be taken away. The lawsuit's still happening, he said. Yeah, but now we go into it with proof that you're exactly who I said you were. A brilliant architect who sees things other people miss. Vivian stood up. Get some sleep. You look like hell. Thanks. I mean it. You can't keep working 20-hour days. Even geniuses need rest. After she left, Adrian sat in his office and let himself feel it. The win. Small and temporary and fragile, but real. He picked up Emma early that day, took her to the park, pushed her on the swings and watched her laugh, and tried to remember that this, not the lawsuits, not the board meetings, not the late-night coding sessions, this was what mattered. You seem happy, Emma said from the top of the slide. I am happy. Did something good happen? Yeah, something good happened. Emma slid down, landed in the wood chips, ran back to the ladder. Good. You deserve good things, Daddy. Adrian's throat was tight. Thanks, baby. Also, can we get pizza for dinner? He laughed. Yeah, we can get pizza. That night, after Emma was asleep, Adrian's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. This is David Thornton. We should talk. Adrian stared at the message for a long time. Then he deleted it and went to bed. Whatever Thornton wanted to say, Adrian wasn't interested in hearing it. Not anymore. Thornton didn't give up after that first text. He tried again 2 days later, then again 3 days after that. Each message was variations on the same theme. We need to talk. This doesn't have to go to trial. Let's settle this like professionals. Adrian deleted everyone without responding. Whatever game Thornton was playing, Adrian wasn't interested in being a piece on the board. But the messages bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Late at night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling while Emma slept in the next room, Adrian would wonder what Thornton wanted to say. An apology? A threat? Some kind of deal where they both walked away and pretended the last 4 years hadn't happened? None of it mattered. The truth mattered. The evidence mattered. Everything else was just noise. The trial preparation consumed the next 2 months. Margaret and her team interviewed everyone who'd worked with Adrian at NextCore. Kumar gave testimony about the platform fix. Jessica talked about the backup failure that Adrian had solved in 12 minutes. Robert detailed the meta-validation framework and how it had transformed their entire approach to system reliability. The technical evidence was overwhelming, but Harrison Wheeler, Thornton's lead attorney, was good at his job. He took every piece of proof and twisted it just enough to create doubt. Kumar said Adrian was brilliant? Wheeler argued that brilliance doesn't prove the neurosphere evidence wasn't fabricated. Jessica praised his problem-solving. Wheeler suggested those problems might have been manufactured to make Adrian look good. The meta-validation framework was revolutionary? Wheeler claimed it proved Adrian was desperate to justify his inflated salary. Margaret tried to prepare Adrian for what was coming, but there was no preparing for the reality of sitting across a courtroom from the man who destroyed your life while he smiled like you were old friends catching up. The trial started on a Tuesday in November. Cold outside, colder inside the courtroom. Adrian wore a suit that Vivian had insisted on buying him, something about not looking like he couldn't afford proper clothes. Emma stayed with Mrs. Chen. Adrian had tried to explain where he was going, why he might be gone for days at a time. "You're going to fight the bad man," Emma had said with the clarity of a child who saw the world in simpler terms than adults allowed themselves. "Yeah, baby, I'm going to fight." "Are you going to win?" Adrian had wanted to say yes, wanted to promise her that truth always won, that justice always prevailed, that good people who did the right thing always came out ahead. But he'd learned 4 years ago that those were fairy tales. "I'm going to try," he'd said instead. "That's all I can do." Now, sitting in the courtroom while the judge read preliminary instructions, Adrian wondered if trying was enough. The jury looked skeptical. 12 people who probably thought this was just another corporate lawsuit where both sides were equally corrupt and the truth was somewhere in the middle. Wheeler's opening statement was a masterpiece of misdirection. He painted Vivian as a CEO, desperate to explain her platform's failure, Adrian as an opportunist who saw a chance to reinvent himself, and the whole redemption narrative as a carefully orchestrated PR campaign. "The evidence will show," Wheeler said, pacing in front of the jury with practiced ease, that Adrian Cole was hired not because of his qualifications, but because he represented a compelling story. The janitor who saves the company, the wronged man getting a second chance. It's a narrative we want to believe, but wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. He talked about the server logs, suggested they'd been manipulated. Talked about Adrian's lack of recent experience, suggested he'd been out of the industry too long to contribute meaningfully. Talked about the timeline, 48 hours from janitor to senior architect, and suggested it proved the decision was emotional, not rational. Ms. Hart saw an opportunity, Wheeler concluded, an opportunity to position herself as a champion of the underdog, an opportunity to explain away her CTO's departure with a convenient villain, and Mr. Cole was the perfect vehicle for both. But the truth, ladies and gentlemen, is simpler and sadder. David Thornton was fired because NextCore needed a scapegoat for their failing platform. And Adrian Cole's credentials were resurrected not because they were legitimate, but because they were useful. Margaret's opening was more direct. She walked the jury through the evidence, the archived server logs showing Thornton's deletion of Adrian's warnings, the timestamps proving when the files were scrubbed, the technical analysis confirming that Adrian's solution had stabilized the platform. "This case isn't complicated," Margaret said. "Mr. Thornton deleted evidence to cover his mistakes. When those mistakes caused a catastrophic failure at Neurosphere, he let Mr. Cole take the blame. 4 years later, Mr. Thornton made the same mistakes at NextCore. This time, Mr. Cole was there to identify the problem before it became catastrophic. That's not narrative. That's not PR. That's just what happened." The first week of trial was technical testimony. Expert witnesses explaining server architecture, data deletion protocols, timestamp verification. Adrian watched the jury's eyes glaze over as engineers used words like recursive bias amplification and validation coefficient weighting. Wheeler used the complexity to his advantage. During cross-examination, he'd ask witnesses to explain concepts in simpler terms, then act confused when they tried. The message was clear. This is all too complicated for regular people to understand. You're being asked to trust experts who might be lying. Adrian's turn on the stand came in week 2. Margaret walked him through his history at Neurosphere. The warnings he'd issued, the reports he'd written, the meetings where he'd explained the risks. "And what happened to those warnings?" Margaret asked. "They were deleted from the system by someone with administrator access." Who had that access? David Thornton, among others, but the deletion logs show it was his credentials that were used. Wheeler's cross-examination was brutal. He spent 3 hours picking apart every detail of Adrian's story, looking for inconsistencies. "Mr. Cole, you claim you wrote detailed warnings about the Neurosphere platform, but you don't have copies of those warnings, do you?" "They were deleted from the system." How convenient. And you expect this jury to believe that you wrote extensive technical documentation but didn't keep personal copies? I was an employee. The documentation belonged to the company. I didn't think I needed backup copies. Or maybe the documentation never existed. Maybe you're reconstructing history to fit a narrative that makes you look good. The server logs prove that files were deleted. They don't prove what was in those files. For all we know, you could have written grocery lists. The logs don't show content, Mr. Cole, only metadata. Adrian kept his voice steady. The metadata includes file names, platform_risk_analysis_Cole_v3.pdf isn't a grocery list. File names can be manipulated just as easily as timestamps. Margaret objected. The judge sustained, but the damage was done. Wheeler had planted doubt. The worst part came when Wheeler brought up Emma. Mr. Cole, you were a single parent working a minimum wage job when Ms. Hart offered you this position, correct? I was supporting my daughter, yes. On a janitor's salary? Yes. That must have been difficult, financially. Adrian's jaw tightened. We managed. Did you have savings? Some. How much? Margaret objected. Relevance? I'm establishing Mr. Cole's financial situation at the time of his hiring, Wheeler said smoothly. It goes to motive. The judge allowed it. Adrian answered. About $800. $800. And your rent was how much per month? $1,200. So you were functionally broke, living paycheck to paycheck, probably worried about being able to provide for your daughter. I was managing. Were you? Or were you desperate? Desperate enough to say whatever Ms. Hart wanted to hear if it meant a $400,000 salary? I told the truth. You told a story that got you a job. Whether it's the truth or not is what we're here to determine. Adrian wanted to hit him, wanted to explain that, yeah, he'd been desperate, but not desperate enough to lie. Desperate enough to finally tell the truth after 4 years of silence. But Wheeler had already moved on, already painted the picture of a struggling father who'd do anything to secure his daughter's future. The jury looked sympathetic, but sympathy wasn't the same as belief. That night, Adrian sat in his apartment with Emma already asleep and called Vivian. She answered on the first ring. How bad was it? She asked. Wheeler made me sound like a con artist who exploited your generosity. That's his job, doesn't make it true. The jury looked like they believed him. Juries are unpredictable. That's why we have evidence. Vivian paused. You still telling the truth? Yeah. Then we'll be fine. Adrian wanted to believe her, but belief was getting harder to hold on to. The turning point came in week 3. Margaret called a witness that Wheeler hadn't been expecting, a former neurosphere engineer named Lisa Park, who'd worked on the same team as Adrian and Thornton. Lisa was in her mid-30s, serious expression, the kind of person who looked like she didn't tolerate nonsense. Margaret established her credentials, then asked, Did you work with Adrian Cole at Neurosphere? Yes. He was my supervisor. And David Thornton? He was the senior director overseeing our division. Do you recall Mr. Cole raising concerns about the platform's validation architecture? Yes, multiple times. He wrote reports, sent emails, brought it up in meetings. He was persistent about it. Wheeler leaned forward. Adrian could see him taking notes, preparing his cross. What happened to those concerns? Margaret asked. They were dismissed. Thornton said the risks were acceptable given our launch timeline. He told Adrian to focus on implementation instead of theoretical problems. Did Mr. Cole accept that? No. He kept pushing, wrote a final report detailing the exact failure mode that eventually occurred, submitted it to the board. And 3 days later, that report was gone from the system. Adrian asked me if I still had my copy. I checked. It was gone from my archive, too. Every version, every draft, all deleted. The courtroom went very quiet. Wheeler was scribbling frantically. Did you think that was unusual? Margaret asked. Extremely. Documents don't just disappear. Someone with admin access had to purge them. Did you report this? Lisa hesitated. No. Why not? Because 3 days after the report disappeared, Adrian was called into HR and told his position was being eliminated. I was a mid-level engineer with student loans. I couldn't afford to lose my job by making waves. Her honesty was devastating. You could see the jury processing it. Here was someone with nothing to gain, admitting she'd stayed silent to to protect herself. Wheeler's cross-examination tried to shake her testimony. Ms. Park, how can you be certain the report was deleted by someone at Neurosphere? Maybe Mr. Cole deleted his own work. Adrian didn't have admin access. He couldn't delete files from other people's archives. Maybe you're misremembering. This was 4 years ago. I'm not misremembering. I kept a personal log of all the concerns Adrian raised because I thought someday they'd matter. I still have that log. Margaret smiled. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Ms. Park's log as evidence. The log was damning. Dated entries describing every warning Adrian had issued, every meeting where Thornton had dismissed those warnings, every email that had mysteriously vanished. It corroborated everything Adrian had claimed. Wheeler tried to argue the log could be fabricated, but the metadata was clean. The files were 4 years old. Unless Lisa had been planning this moment since 2022, the log was legitimate. The trial shifted after that. Margaret brought in more Neurosphere employees, all telling variations of the same story. Thornton had dismissed warnings. Documentation had disappeared. Adrian had been made a scapegoat. Thornton himself took the stand in week 4. He was smooth, confident, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Adrian's monthly salary. He denied everything. I never deleted any reports, he said calmly. Mr. Cole's concerns were documented and addressed through proper channels. The fact that his predictions came true doesn't mean he was right at the time. Even a broken clock is correct twice a day. Margaret destroyed him. Mr. Thornton, the server logs show files being deleted using your credentials. How do you explain that? My credentials could have been compromised. By whom? I don't know. Maybe Mr. Cole himself trying to frame me. Mr. Cole didn't have the technical access to compromise administrator credentials. Then maybe someone else at Neurosphere. I can't account for every person who might have had a grudge. Or maybe you deleted the files yourself to cover up the fact that you ignored legitimate warnings. I did not. Margaret pulled up an email. This is a message from you to the Neurosphere board dated 2 weeks before the platform crash. Quote, Adrian Cole's concerns about validation architecture are noted but not actionable given our current timeline. We proceed as planned. Unquote. Does that sound like someone who properly addressed the concerns? Thornton's composure cracked slightly. That email is out of context. The context is that you prioritize schedule over safety. Mr. Cole warned you, you ignored him, and when the platform failed, you blamed him. That's not what happened. Then what did happen, Mr. Thornton? Because every witness we've called says the same thing. You dismissed warnings, deleted evidence, and let an innocent man take the fall for your mistakes. Thornton's attorney objected. The judge sustained, but the jury had heard enough. The closing arguments happened on a Friday. Wheeler gave it one last shot, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that correlation wasn't causation, that Adrian's story was too convenient to be completely true. Margaret was more direct. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple. David Thornton made mistakes. He ignored warnings from someone smarter than him. When those mistakes caused a disaster, he covered his tracks and blamed the person who'd tried to prevent it. 4 years later, he made the same mistakes at a different company. This time, that same person was there to stop the disaster before it happened. Mr. Thornton doesn't like being wrong, but being wrong isn't defamation. It's just reality. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Adrian spent those days in a fog, going through the motions at work, but not really present. Emma noticed. Is the fighting almost over? She asked Tuesday night over dinner. Soon, baby. Are you going to win? Adrian looked at his daughter, at her hopeful expression, at the trust in her eyes that said she still believed her father could do anything. I don't know, he said honestly, but I told the truth. That's all I can control. Mom used to say telling the truth is the hardest thing and the most important thing. She was right. Then you already won, even if the jury doesn't know it yet. Adrian pulled her into a hug, this tiny person who somehow understood more about integrity than most adults ever would. The verdict came Wednesday afternoon. Margaret called at 2:15. Jury's back. Can you get to the courthouse? Adrian was there in 20 minutes. The courtroom was packed, press, spectators, people from NextCore and Neurosphere, all wanting to see how this ended. Vivian was in the back row. She caught Adrian's eye, gave a small nod. The jury filed in. Adrian tried to read their expressions. Some looked tired, some looked resolved. None of them looked at Thornton, which Margaret had said was usually a good sign. The judge asked for the verdict. The four-person stood. In the matter of Thornton versus NextCore Technologies and Adrian Cole, we the jury find in favor of the defendants on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Adrian heard the words but couldn't quite process them. In favor of the defendants. They'd won. He'd won. The judge was reading the jury's statement. We find that the evidence presented clearly demonstrates that David Thornton deleted documentation from Neurosphere servers, that Adrian Cole's warnings were legitimate, and that NextCore's public statements were factually accurate and not defamatory. Thornton's face had gone white. Wheeler was already gathering his papers, probably planning the appeal, but Adrian just sat there, letting it sink in. 4 years. 4 years of carrying the weight of being called a failure. 4 years of knowing he was right and having nobody believe him. 4 years of being invisible because visibility meant pain. And now a jury of 12 strangers had said, "You were telling the truth." Margaret squeezed his shoulder. "We won." "Yeah," Adrian said, and his voice came out rough. "We did." Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Adrian had prepared a statement with Margaret, but when the cameras turned on, the words he'd practiced disappeared. 4 years ago, I tried to do the right thing, he said. I warned people about problems I could see coming. They didn't listen. When those problems happened anyway, they blamed me. For a long time, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. But the truth doesn't change just because people don't believe it. And eventually, if you keep telling the truth, someone listens. A reporter shouted a question. What do you say to David Thornton? Adrian thought about that. About the man who'd destroyed his career, who'd let him suffer for years, who'd fought this lawsuit to protect a reputation that was built on lies. I hope he learns from this, Adrian said finally. I hope he realizes that being smart doesn't mean you're always right, and that admitting mistakes is stronger than hiding them. That night, NextCore threw a celebration. The executive floor conference room, champagne that probably cost more per bottle than Adrian used to make in a week. People congratulating him like they'd always believed in him. Adrian shook hands, accepted praise, and felt completely disconnected from all of it. The win was real, the vindication was real, but it didn't erase 4 years of pain. It didn't bring back the time he'd lost with Emma while working 3 jobs. It didn't undo the humiliation of being called a fraud. It just meant the truth was on record now. That had to be enough. Vivian found him on the balcony, escaping the noise. You okay? Yeah, just needed air. This is a big win, Adrian, not just for the lawsuit, for everything. Your reputation is cleared. Thornton's career is probably over. You get to move forward without that hanging over you. I know. Vivian studied him. But it doesn't feel like you expected. Winning doesn't fix what broke. It just proves it shouldn't have broken in the first place. That's very philosophical for someone who just won a $20 million lawsuit. Adrian smiled despite himself. Sorry, I'll try to be more celebratory. Don't. You're allowed to feel however you feel. This whole thing was... Vivian paused, searching for words. It was unfair. The fact that you had to fight this hard just to prove you were telling the truth is ridiculous. You shouldn't have had to do this. But I did, and now it's over. Now it's over, Vivian agreed, which means we get to focus on the future instead of fighting the past. She pulled out her phone, showed him an email. The board met this afternoon. They want to offer you a promotion. VP of AI Architecture, seat at the executive table, 30% salary increase. Adrian read the email twice. That's a big jump. You've earned it. The meta-validation framework alone is worth more than your current salary. And with Thornton's lawsuit settled, there's no reason to hold back. What if I'm not ready? You stopped being not ready the night you walked into my conference room and explained recursive bias patterns to a room full of PhDs. Vivian put her phone away. But you don't have to decide tonight. Think about it. Talk to Emma. Figure out what you want your life to look like now that you're not fighting just to survive. After the party ended, Adrian picked up Emma from Mrs. Chen's. She was already in her pajamas, half asleep on the couch. Did you win? She asked groggily. Yeah, baby, we won. I knew you would. Adrian carried her home, tucked her into bed, and sat in her doorway watching her sleep. This kid who'd been through so much, losing her mom, watching her dad struggle, living in apartments that were never quite good enough. She'd never complained, never asked for more than he could give, just trusted that her father was doing his best. He thought about Vivian's offer. VP of AI Architecture. The kind of position he'd dreamed about before Neurosphere, before the crash, before everything fell apart. The kind of position that came with security and respect and the resources to build things that mattered. But it also came with longer hours, more travel, bigger responsibilities, less time with Emma, less ability to pick her up at 6 every day, less of the stability he'd fought so hard to build. The next morning, Adrian called Vivian. "I want the promotion," he said, "but with conditions." "I'm listening." "I need flexible hours. Real flexible. Not just technically on paper flexible. If Emma has a school event, I'm there. If she's sick, I work from home. If she needs me, that takes priority." "Done." "What else?" "I want to build a team. Not just engineers, but people who've been counted out. People who got second chances or who never got first chances. People who are smart but don't have the right credentials or the right background." "That's going to be controversial with HR." "I know, but we just proved that credentials aren't everything. I want to find more people like me. People who can see patterns others miss because they've been on the outside looking in." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're going to change how we hire, aren't you?" "I'm going to try." "Okay, build your team. I'll handle HR. And one more thing. Of course there is. I want a transparency policy. Full documentation on all projects. No buried warnings, no deleted reports. If someone sees a problem, it goes on record. We might not always fix it immediately, but we acknowledge it. No more scapegoats. Adrian, that's going to slow down development. It's going to create uncomfortable conversations. Yeah, but it's also going to prevent another Neurosphere, another situation where someone tells the truth and gets destroyed for it. Vivian laughed. You're going to be a pain in my ass as VP, aren't you? Probably. Good. I like people who push back. Keeps me honest. She paused. The promotion is official Monday. Welcome to the executive team. Adrian hung up and looked around his apartment. Same place he'd been living for 6 months, but it felt different now. Not temporary. Not like he was just surviving until the next crisis. Like maybe, possibly, this could be home. Emma wandered in, rubbing her eyes. Who were you talking to? Vivian. From work. Did she give you more important jobs? Something like that. Are you going to be gone more? Adrian knelt down. No. Actually, I made sure I could be home more because you're the most important job I have. Emma hugged him. I like when you're home. Me too, baby. That weekend, Adrian took Emma to NextCore's headquarters. It was Saturday, the building mostly empty. He had a badge now that gave him access to all floors. Rode the elevator up to 47, walked her through the executive wing. This is where you work? Emma asked, eyes wide. This is where I used to clean. Now I work a few floors down, but I wanted to show you something. He led her to the big conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The whiteboard still had equations on it from someone's meeting. The table could seat 20 people. The view stretched for miles. This is where it started, Adrian said. I was cleaning floors, saw a problem on that whiteboard, couldn't help myself. You fixed it? I tried to. They didn't want to listen at first. Because you were the janitor. Yeah. Emma walked to the window, pressed her hands against the glass. But they listened eventually. Eventually. Because you were right. Because I told the truth, even when it was scary. Emma turned to look at him. Mom always said being brave isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the thing anyway. Adrian's throat tightened. She said that? All the time. When she was sick. When she was scared. Emma came back over, took his hand. I think you were brave, Daddy, even when you were just mopping floors. They stood there together, looking out over the city. Adrian thought about the last 4 years, the humiliation, the struggle, the nights when giving up seemed easier than keeping going. He thought about Sarah, about the choices he'd made to honor her memory by being the kind of father she'd believed he could be. He thought about Vivian taking a chance on a janitor with a story, about Kumar and Jessica and Robert, who'd become more than just colleagues, about Margaret fighting for truth even when winning seemed impossible, about Lisa Park keeping a log for 4 years just in case it mattered someday. And he thought about Emma, this small person with her mother's courage, standing beside him in a building where he'd been invisible and was now seen, You know what I think? Adrian said. What? I think being brave is also about knowing when to accept help, when to trust people, when to believe that maybe, just maybe, things can get better. Emma squeezed his hand. Are things better now? Adrian looked out at the city, at the sunlight hitting the buildings, at the world stretching out below them, full of possibility and risk and everything in between. Yeah, he said, things are better now. Monday morning, Adrian walked into his first executive meeting as VP of AI architecture. The conference room was different from the one where he'd first interrupted Vivian. Smaller, more intimate, filled with people who actually wanted to hear what he had to say. Vivian introduced him to the team. Some faces he recognized. Others were new. All of them looked at him with respect earned rather than assumed. Adrian's going to be leading our AI division moving forward, Vivian said, which means significant changes to how we approach development, validation, and transparency. I'll let him explain. Adrian stood up. 6 months ago, standing in front of executives would have terrified him. Now it just felt like work. We're going to do things differently, he said. Not because the old way was completely wrong, but because we can be better. We're going to document everything. We're going to listen when people raise concerns. We're going to value insight over credentials. And we're going to build systems that don't just work, but work right. Someone asked a question about timelines. Someone else about resources. Adrian answered them all, confident in ways he'd forgotten he could be. After the meeting, Vivian caught up with him in the hallway. That went well. You sound surprised. I'm not, but I think some of the board members were expecting someone more corporate. If they wanted corporate, they shouldn't have hired the janitor. Vivian laughed. Fair point. By the way, I got a call from TechCrunch this morning. They want to do a follow-up story. Where is Adrian Cole now? Kind of thing. Do I have to? No, but it might be good. Control the narrative one last time. Show people that second chances can work out. Adrian thought about that. About all the people out there who'd been counted out, passed over, told they weren't good enough. People who were smart and capable but didn't fit the standard mold. Okay, yeah, he said. I'll do the interview, but on my terms. The interview happened 2 weeks later. The reporter was the same woman from Wired who'd covered the original story. She set up in one of NextCore's conference rooms, camera crew and all. So, she said once they were rolling, last time we talked, you were fighting to clear your name. Now you're VP of AI architecture at one of the biggest tech companies in the country. How does that feel? Adrian thought about how to answer that honestly. It feels like vindication, he said, but not the way people might think. It's not about proving I was always good enough. It's about proving that being counted out doesn't mean you're actually out. That you can come back from failure if you're willing to tell the truth and do the work. What would you say to people in similar situations? People who've been blamed for things that weren't their fault? I'd say document everything. Tell the truth even when it's inconvenient, and find people who value integrity over optics. Adrian paused. But I'd also say it's going to be hard. Vindication doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give you back the years you lost. It just means you get to move forward knowing you were right. Sometimes that has to be enough. Any regrets? Adrian thought about that. About the 4 years mopping floors, about missing time with Emma, about the humiliation and the struggle and the nights when keeping going seemed impossible. No, he said finally, because those 4 years taught me things I needed to learn. About resilience, about what matters, about the difference between being respected and being respectable. I wouldn't choose to go through it again, but I wouldn't trade what I learned either. The article went live 3 days later. The headline, Adrian Cole and the Second Chance That Changed Everything. It was good press, fair press, the kind that focused on the work rather than the drama. Adrian read it once, decided it was accurate enough, and moved on. He had bigger things to think about. His team was growing. He'd hired 2 engineers who'd been laid off during the last tech crash, a brilliant data scientist who'd left the industry to teach high school, and a systems architect who'd spent 5 years working in retail after a health crisis derailed her career. None of them had traditional trajectories. All of them were exceptional. The meta-validation framework was being implemented across NextCore's entire platform. Early results showed 47% reduction in errors, 33% improvement in accuracy. Other companies were reaching out, asking about licensing the technology. Adrian's life had stabilized into something he'd stopped believing was possible. Good work. Good pay. Respect from people whose opinions mattered. Time with Emma. A future that looked bright instead of terrifying. 3 months after the trial ended, Adrian got a letter. Handwritten, no return address. He almost threw it away, but something made him open it. The handwriting was neat, controlled. The message was short. Adrian, I should have listened to you at Neurosphere. I was wrong, not just about the architecture, but about how I handled the aftermath. I let my ego matter more than the truth. I let you take blame that was mine. I can't undo that. But I wanted you to know that I know. I was wrong. You were right. I'm sorry. David Thornton. Adrian read it 3 times. He thought about responding, about accepting the apology, about offering some kind of reconciliation. Then he folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and decided that some things didn't need a response. Thornton knew he'd been wrong. That was enough. Adrian didn't need to absolve him. That weekend, Adrian took Emma apartment hunting. Their current place was fine, but they could afford better now. Something with 2 bedrooms, maybe a small yard, and a neighborhood with good schools. Emma ran through each place they looked at, pointing out which room would be hers, where they could put the couch, whether the kitchen was big enough for their growing collection of cooking experiments. At the 5th apartment, she stopped in the living room and looked around with that serious expression. "This one feels like home," she said. Adrian looked around. It was nice, bigger than their current place, good light, quiet street, nothing fancy, but comfortable, safe. Yeah, he agreed, it does. They signed the lease that afternoon. Moved in 3 weeks later with help from Kumar and Jessica, who showed up with pizza and bad jokes about how Adrian's books weighed more than seemed physically possible. "You know they make digital copies now, right?" Jessica said, hauling a box labeled Architecture Theory. "Digital copies don't feel the same. They also don't give you a hernia." Emma loved the new place. She decorated her room with drawings and stuffed animals and a photo of Sarah that Adrian had framed. That first night, she came into Adrian's room while he was unpacking. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Do you think Mom would be proud of where we are now?" Adrian set down the box he was holding, pulled Emma into a hug. "I think she'd be incredibly proud. Of both of us." "I miss her. Me too. Every day. But we're okay, right? Even without her?" Adrian kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, baby. We're okay." 6 months after winning the lawsuit, Adrian stood in NextCore's main auditorium presenting the completed validation framework to a room full of engineers, executives, and investors. The system was live. The results were undeniable. Error rates down, accuracy up, client satisfaction at record highs. But what Adrian was most proud of was the transparency layer. Every warning, every concern, every identified risk was now documented and visible. No more buried reports, no more deleted evidence, no more scapegoats. "This framework isn't just about preventing errors," Adrian said to the crowd. "It's about creating a culture where identifying problems is valued more than hiding them, where being right matters more than looking right, where truth is treated as an asset instead of a liability." The applause was genuine. After the presentation, people lined up to ask questions, to congratulate him, to pitch ideas for future collaboration. Adrian fielded them all with a confidence that felt earned rather than faked. Vivian found him afterward, looking pleased. "That was good. Really good. Thanks." "Think the investors were convinced?" "I think the investors are wondering how they ever doubted you." She paused. "I got an interesting call this morning. MIT wants you to give a guest lecture on validation architecture and ethical system design." MIT. Your alma mater's rival, but still, it's a big deal. Adrian thought about standing in front of students, teaching them the lessons he'd learned the hard way, about preparing the next generation to value integrity over convenience. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if I can talk about Neurosphere too, about what happens when you ignore warnings, about the cost of choosing speed over safety." They might not want to hear that part. Then they need to hear it more. Vivian smiled. "This is why I hired you." "Because I'm difficult?" "Because you're honest, even when it's inconvenient." That night, Adrian sat in his new apartment with Emma already asleep, looking at the city lights through the window. He thought about the journey from invisible to visible, from failure to vindication, from survival to success. The truth was, he was still the same person he'd been mopping floors. Same skills, same knowledge, same ability to see patterns others missed. What had changed wasn't him. It was whether people were willing to listen. That was the real lesson, Adrian thought. Not that hard work always pays off, or that truth always wins, or that good people always come out ahead. Those were fairy tales. The real lesson was simpler and harder. You tell the truth anyway. You do the work anyway. You keep going anyway. Not because it guarantees success, but because it's the only way to live with yourself. Sometimes you get vindication. Sometimes you just get the knowledge that you did the right thing. Either way, you move forward. Adrian closed his laptop, checked on Emma one more time, and went to bed in an apartment that was starting to feel like home. The next morning, his alarm went off at 6. He made breakfast, got Emma ready for school, dropped her off with a kiss and a reminder to be kind to others. Then he drove to NextCore, rode the elevator up to his floor, and walked into an office that had his name on the door. VP of AI Architecture. 4 words that represented 4 years of fighting, of surviving, of refusing to let other people's lies become his truth. Kumar was already in the conference room, working on code. Jessica was arguing with Robert about security protocols. The team was growing, thriving, building things that mattered. Adrian joined them, pulled up his laptop, and got to work. There were problems to solve, systems to improve, warnings to document so they'd never be buried again. It was hard work, important work, the kind of work that made the last 4 years worth it. And for the first time in a very long time, Adrian was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because he was perfect, not because he'd never failed, but because he'd been willing to be brave when it mattered, to tell the truth when it cost him everything, and to keep going when giving up seemed easier. That was enough. That had to be enough. And looking around at the team he'd built, the systems he was creating, the future he was shaping, Adrian thought maybe it was more than enough. Maybe it was exactly right.